This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everybody to the Engineering and Operations Committee meeting and special meeting of the Board of Directors of the West Basin Municipal Water District. We have a quorum of the committee. Member Director Williams is present. And are there any public comments? Oh, and I also see that our alternate member, Director Houston, has joined us.
I'm here, thank you.
So it's no public comments?
Director Alvarez, good afternoon members of the committee and board, staff and the public. No, we have no public comment today.
Okay, then we'll move on to presentations. We have a presentation today, Recognition of National Engineers Week. Who's going to be making the presentation?
Yes, we do, Chairman Alvarez. We have a presentation for this week, which we're recognizing today. The presentation, first of all, is going to be given by the Manager of Engineering, Wendell Johnson. And we have 13 engineers on our staff, and 40% of our board is also have civil engineering. So we're well represented in the engineering world, and we're going to cover and recognize some of these folks and what this week means and what the recognition means. And I'll hand it over to Wendell to give this presentation. Wendell.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Good afternoon, Chairman Alvarez and committee members, as well as the general public. This afternoon, I'm here to give recognition of National Engineers Week, which is February 21st through the 27th. A little background on National Engineers Week. It's been celebrated since 1951 by the National Society of Professional Engineers. One of the goals of Professional Engineers Week is to promote public awareness of engineering contributions to the quality of life. Engineers in our society, in our community, we're responsible for a lot of the infrastructure. We're responsible for the buildings, highways, the distribution of water, the sewer collection system, as well as great works like airports, dams, and hydro works, and electric grid, and the list just goes on. Certainly here at West Basin, we're responsible for the infrastructure that supports our water processes, as well as the distribution system. And another goal of the National Engineers Week is to increase the understanding and interest in science, engineering, and technology. We're looking for that next generation of engineers. Here at West Basin, we're responsible for both engineering and operations side of the organization. We're responsible for the capital improvement project. We have a 5-year capital improvement project of about $270 million, as well as renovation and restoration of existing facilities on our operations end of the program. Just to highlight and to give recognitions to some of the engineers, or hopefully I've got all the engineers here at West Basin, and starting with our president of the board, Director Harold Williams. He's been an engineer in the local area or the Southern California area for well over 30 years. He's served various communities, and he's quite active in the professional engineering community, and he also has a consultant engineering business at this time. One of our newest members of our board is the chairman of this committee, Desi Alvarez. Desi Alvarez has an impressive history. I've been fortunate to have worked with him in the past on some of the interagency boards that we have worked with together on. Mr. Alvarez, not only did he graduate honors as a civil engineer, but he went and did it twice, and he holds a degree in Masters of Engineering, as well as has a local consultant engineering firm. Our executive manager of engineering and operation is Barkev. He also has a master's in engineering from a local Cal State at Long Beach. Myself, you know, I've been in engineering quite a long time. I think it probably started when I got a note back from my elementary school. I had to take it home to my parents, and my parents to tell them that I was daydreaming. And I really wasn't daydreaming, but I was watching them build my middle school outside the window. So I've had a long standing in engineering and building and construction of that type. One of my key cornerstones here at West Basin is Veronica. She's kind of the go-to person, especially when we're talking about, she has a strange power of understanding federal regulations. And so she's quite knowledgeable and doing business with the Army Corps of Engineers, and she's very useful in there. Celebrating his 1-year anniversary with our organization, Orlando Rodriguez joined us from a local agency about a year ago. He's a senior engineer with our organization. One of the latest department new hires is Mr. Joel Blair. He has a chemical engineering background, but he's also a licensed civil engineer. Kevin Cullen has recently accomplished completing his first part of the PE examination, which is vital for his professional development. Alejandra Alejandra is an environmental engineer. She's my go-to person when we talk about environmental regulations as well as environmental studies that the department is working on. Camille, we want to congratulate her. She was recently promoted, and again, her background is environmental engineering. Susanna is our guru of operations and all processes that need to be processed. She also has a master's degree. We want to thank Frank Flukes. He's involved in the day-to-day operation of our distribution system, both the interface with the operation of our potable water as well as the distribution system of our recycled water. Jason is vital in our operations as a mechanical engineer, and we also are fortunate to have Jeremiah and Jamie both having master's degrees in engineering. And you know, engineers, we're kind of the tough people. We kind of know everything, but you know, you put two of us in a room and we come out with three opinions, but we're also vital in what the quality of life that we have in our community. And
May I interrupt? This is the Director Don Deere.
Yes, Mr. Deere.
Yeah, you said engineers know everything. Actually, board members know everything. Engineers think they know everything. That's all.
Yeah, I have to stop myself because I always think that I know everything. But anyway.
Thank you for that clarification, Director Deere.
But anyway, there will be a proclamation read at the board meeting later this month, dedicating a week to the National Engineers Week, and that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions or any comments, feel free to speak.
Any questions or comments from other committee members or board members?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to say something. I want to know if is there a press release on this? All of the high power engineering staff, I mean the engineering personnel we have here. This sounds great.
Yeah, we'll work with our PI group to see if we can get some something out on social media or in the press, recognizing the fact that we're recognizing Engineers Week in the first place and how well represented we are by the discipline of engineering at our agency. We'll look into that for sure.
Well, we're going to look into it. We haven't done it already. This is the week.
Yeah, no, we have been looking into it. Exactly how we're going to. To that end, though, I would ask, by the way, if I may, Director Alvarez, all of the
Yes.
engineers that were called out, if they can come on screen, because we want to take a screen. Normally, we would have a group shot here in the office or in the boardroom with me today and with the board, but we can't do that, obviously. So if all of you who were mentioned by Wendell, if you could just come up on screen, put your cameras on so we can take a quick picture. And Harold Williams, or Director Williams, continue if you have other comments. Sorry to interrupt. There we go.
I just think this needs to be known, needs to be out there. That I mean, we have these, and all of them are young. You look at they're young people.
Thank you.
So reminds me, gee whiz, I used to be young once. But
Most of them are young.
yeah, but this is, I'm very proud to be among these sharp individuals. Great job, Wendell, of speaking about this Engineers Week. And I hope we continue to develop and grow. And you know, I heard a while back, I don't remember how long ago, but it said, he who does not toot his own horn goes tootless. So we must let the people out there know that we have a strong, highly educated team of engineers from top to the bottom. I know that there's some, are there any interns out there? We have any interns, or are we able to do that yet?
Yeah, not currently during the pandemic, but we definitely will get some teeth into this. I see Amy's on the call, so Amy, I'll talk to you afterwards about how we can further recognize this important week.
Yes, and then talk about the support that these engineers have. There's some folks who aren't called engineers, but they're technicians, and they have certification and as treatment plant operators, distribution certification, all that. That's good too. So they support us. So we need to talk about that in our press release. So thank you very much, you guys. Appreciate it very much.
Wendell, you did a great job introducing everybody. It's a pleasure to see that we do have so many engineers on the staff.
Thank you.
Director Alvarez, hello.
Yes,
Director
go ahead,
Alvarez,
Director
Director.
Gray.
I'd like to make some comments if I can.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. I wanted to thank Wendell for that report. It was very informative, and it was great hearing that we have so many engineers, and obviously they're the backbone of our public works projects and so forth of our agency. But I want to just make mention of the fact I was elated to hear a number of women that are in engineering. And so I'm very, very pleased to hear that we do have women involved in our workforce that are engineers and so forth. And so congratulations to all the engineers, and look forward to the proclamation at our board meeting. So thank you very much to all the staff who are in our engineering program. Thank you.
Director Gray, just by point of interest, it is very pleasing to see that there's a lot of women engineers on the staff. And if you do look at curriculums today, I think that in most of the engineering fields, and civil being one of them, that the number of undergraduate engineering majors that are female exceeds male, which is quite a difference from where things were when I went to school, when we didn't have any women in our class. And I think probably that Director Williams would report the same, or if there was maybe one female or two in the class.
You're right.
Yeah, things are changing. I know I have a granddaughter who's getting ready to graduate in engineering. So I think I probably was helpful in terms of influencing her interest in engineering. So thank you for that information. Things are changing.
Okay, any other comments? If not,
Yes.
we'll look forward to the presentation of the proclamation and maybe a repeat of the introduction of all of the engineering staff at the board meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Director Houston.
Go ahead, Director Houston.
Sure, thank you. Well, everything I would have probably said has already been said, but I just want to also say thank you to all of our wonderful engineers. And not only, are there a number of younger engineers, but, females as well, but obviously a very diverse group in all ways. So I'm really, really proud of you all. I'm proud of this agency. I'm glad that we take an opportunity to recognize you. I concur with President Williams that we should do something with some publicity on that. I think a press release would be worthy. So staff should definitely look at getting something out. But, our residents are proud of this agency. I know a lot of people look to, they'll reach out and say, how can I intern? How can I get an internship, or my child or my grandchild? I've heard that a lot, you guys. So I always tell them, well, you talk to Michelle Green. She'll point you the way, but there's a strong interest in that, as well as the people who may or may not have the engineering degree, but definitely have a lot of the skills. So thank you for recognizing that, and let's keep up the great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other comments on that, let's move on to the action calendar. And for consideration today is the agreement between the Torrance Refinery, City of Torrance, and the West Basin Water District for usage of nitrified recycled water. So General Manager, who's going to be making that presentation? Will that be you, or?
Yeah, let me, Director Alvarez, or Chairman Alvarez, let me introduce it, and then I'll have Barkev do a presentation. I believe we have a PowerPoint on this. So by way of background, this agreement, by the way, is a three-way agreement. It's between the Torrance Refinery, West Basin, and the City of Torrance, although the refinery and West Basin are the principal parties, and it's for the provision of recycled water, a type of recycled water, nitrified water, we call it, which is recycled water with the ammonia removed that they use in their cooling towers. And our relationship and when this agreement started way back in 1995 and expired last July, and it's been extended by the board through the end of this month to allow for negotiations for a new agreement. And I just also mentioned we have another agreement with the Torrance Refinery and the city for the provision of boiler feed water, which is another type of recycled water, a different quality, a different spec for use in there, as the name implies, in the boilers. This one, though, is for the nitrified water, the nitrified recycled water. So what we're going to talk about today is, I mentioned we have two agreements. They were entered into at different times. All of the refineries, all three of them that we currently do business with, Marathon, Chevron, and Torrance, went to and trusted in the cooling tower water, the nitrified water first. That was the easiest, the low-hanging fruit back in the 90s. And after a few years of that, once they had gained confidence in the quality and reliability of that, they moved to the boiler feed. And all three of them now get boiler feed water, which was a separate, and there was a plant built for the nitrified water, and then there was a new plant built, a separate plant built in 2 to 3 or 4 years, depending on the refinery, after the original nitrified agreements. This one is a shorter agreement here. It's a sort of a bridge agreement to get us to when the boiler feed agreement ends in 2023, August. And then we will bring both of them together to start a new or longer term agreement on the same term. And the only other thing I would say here, and Barkev will elaborate on this, is what is unusual about our agreement with the Torrance Refinery is that the satellite facility, there was a special facility that we built in the late 90s or in the 90s and in the early 2000s for boiler feed, is on the property of the refinery. They actually own the land. In the case of Chevron and Marathon, the satellite facilities are on our land, or on our property. So this is a little bit different, and hence there's a discussion here about ownership of the infrastructure at the end of the agreement, and is also why I have Steve O'Neill on the call in there, because there is reference in certain parts of the old agreement or the current agreement that we're in, at the end of the period of that agreement, the ownership would potentially transfer to the refinery, and we'd have to think about what that would mean. But we're not deciding on that today. That's part of the agreement. We're going to look at that in the first 90 days. So sorry, Barkev, if I've kind of talked a lot about what you were going to talk about, but you can get into the details. The emphasis here, of course, was on cost recovery in this agreement. In other words, whatever it takes to provide the water from a commodity or O&M basis, that's the way the contract is constructed to recover those costs. And if there's a capital cost, that cost is also recovered. There's a methodology to recovery. So that's the backdrop to this, and we've been negotiating this for the past several months, all three parties, but mostly the refinery and us, and most recently with our legal counsels involved. So, Barkev?
Mr. Chair, may
Go
I,
ahead, Director Williams.
before you go any further, for the benefit of our audience, can you please tell us why the ammonia has to be removed from the water?
Yes, I can. So for this particular application in the cooling towers, they have metals in what they call admiralty metals, copper and brass, that's used in the piping of all of the cooling towers in all three refineries. And those metals are incompatible with any level of ammonia in the water. It causes them to crack and fail. And so the ammonia, of course, is an inherent byproduct of sewage and wastewater. It's not removed at Hyperion, and it's not removed at a normal Title 22 process at NC Little. So that has to be removed, and that's why it has to be removed. It would cause failure in the cooling towers because of the incompatibility with those admiralty metals.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, Chairman Alvarez and President Williams and members of the board. Yeah, I have a little bit more detail. I think Patrick summed it up pretty well. This action item here included on page 3 of the agenda packet, again, is brought to you to request authorization for the general manager to execute a new agreement for that nitrified recycled water that we supply the Torrance refining company. I'll start off with a little bit of historical background. I think Patrick touched on all these points a little bit. In our efforts to develop the impressive recycled water program that we have today, we West Basin entered into agreements with the local refineries to seek the use of recycled water for cooling tower and boiler feed applications, as Patrick mentioned. One such agreement was with the city of Torrance and the owners of the Torrance refinery back then, that was Mobile. We entered an agreement with them in July 1995 for the supply of the nitrified recycled water. That's the term we're using for the recycled water with the ammonia removed from it. A copy of that agreement is provided on page 7 of your agenda packet. Key provisions of the original agreement established basically the pricing terms for the variable rates, that's the commodity rates, if you will, as well as fixed charges that related to the construction of necessary infrastructure. That infrastructure included a stretch of pipeline. The refinery paid about $30,000 a month over a period of 20 years for the pipeline. The refinery also paid $65,000 a month for a period of 25 years for the construction of an ammonia removal facility that would be placed, as Patrick mentioned, on refinery land. Again, that is a little bit different than the Chevron nitrification plant and the Carson regional plant, whereas in this case, the facilities that were constructed on refinery property.
Barkev, do you have presenting rights? If you do, can you bring up the first part of your slide, not the next slide, please? There you go, so the board can see it.
It is worth noting that the agreement, the key terms of the agreement that was signed in 1995 were actually agreed upon a year earlier in a document that's called Principles of Agreement, and it's also attached to the report on page 16. The Principles of Agreement was signed in 1994, and then there were provisions in there that basically carried over into the agreement that was actually executed a year later. It's good to know that in that Principles of Agreement document, there is some references to facility ownership. Unfortunately, though, the references are not as clear as they could have been. And we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. The term of the existing agreement was set for 25 years, starting from the first delivery of recycled water, which set the agreement expiration to July 25th, 2020. With this in mind, West Basin staff began discussions for a new agreement with the refinery and the city in 2019. With COVID hitting the refinery hard in 2020, it took them a little bit of a time to settle on a negotiating team, but they ultimately came to the table. And throughout this negotiation process, West Basin's approach and proposal has been to fully recover the cost of service, and to recover it with two things. One, to recover the cost of operating and maintaining the facilities that produce and deliver the water, and two, to recover some of the costs for the capital projects that support and maintain the supply of the water to the refinery. To bring the refinery on board with this concept, engineering and operations staff went through an extensive effort to demonstrate the correlation between some of the capital projects and the product that's being delivered to the refinery. Some of the projects were located upstream of the satellite plant. We called those offsite capital projects. And some of the projects were located inside the plant that's shown in the graphic attached to the report. And we called those type of projects on-site capital projects. We presented details of each of the projects to the refinery's technical staff. We even conducted a risk analysis for the refinery using their criteria to demonstrate the need for the projects. All these efforts took time, but they were necessary to address the refinery's questions and get them on board with allocating proportional funds for the capital projects. And as a result, we had asked for the board on 2 occasions to extend the existing agreement and provide more time for negotiation. That's when you see here on the presentation, amendments 1 and 2 were approved by the board to the original agreement that pushed the expiration date to the end of this month. So today we're happy to report that the 3 agencies were able to reach an agreement of terms for a new agreement that would continue to supply nitrified recycled water through August 31st, 2023. A copy of the new agreement is provided on page 28 of your packet. The term of the new agreement would be effective March 1st and then again go through August 31st, 2023. 2 things to note here. Even though we're saying it is effective here March 1st, there are provisions inside of this new agreement that would allow us to reconcile all the refinery payments that were made post July 2020. And also with regards to the expiration on August 31st, 2023, we agreed that that is a good date because that's when the boiler feed agreement would expire. And beyond that date, there'll be a synchronization of the 2 terms, the boiler feed term and a nitrified term, moving beyond that date. Similar to the original agreement, the new agreement will have variable monthly water charges and fixed water charges. The variable monthly water charges or the commodity rate will cover the cost of operation and maintenance. And it would be calculated based on a 3-year rolling average of actual O&M costs, including labor, chemicals, lab, utilities, everything that goes into producing the water that ultimately ends up at the refinery. With fixed water charges, the refinery agreed to pay fixed water charges in the amount of $114,755 per month for a period of 3 years, for a total combined charge of $3,976,066 over the term of this new agreement. These charges will help fund capital improvement projects located upstream of the ammonia removal facility, those off-site capital projects. We agreed to sit down and talk to the refinery's technical staff moving forward to continue to evaluate the potential implementation of on-site projects. Fixed monthly charges for on-site projects would be contingent on both parties agreeing that the project needs to move forward and executing an amendment to the agreement that would establish the on-site fixed charges. One key factor for the refinery on deciding on the on-site projects is the ultimate ownership of the facility, the ownership issue. I mentioned earlier that there were some references in the original principles of agreement about some unclear references about ownership. Realizing that resolving the ownership issue is going to take some time and it might delay, having an agreement. In this new agreement, there is a provision that says that we will attempt to resolve the ownership issue within 90 days with West Basin staff and legal counsel. And if by May 31st, 2021, we are unable to resolve the issue, we would put it up for mediation and attempt to resolve it within 9 months of the effective date. So again, just to recap, the new agreement provides provisions to pay commodity rates that will recover the costs of service, the O&M costs, and also fixed charges for off-site capital projects. Before I read the recommendation, I'd like to give a quick thanks to our general manager, Margaret, our executive manager of finance, Steve O'Neill, and his legal team for the great team effort in negotiating the terms of this agreement. And also I'd like to thank the operations and engineering teams that did a lot of legwork with the refinery technical staff. With that, I'll read the agreement. The recommendation is that the board authorizes the general manager to enter into a new agreement with the Torrance Refining Company LLC and the City of Torrance for the usage of nitrified recycled water at the Torrance Refinery through August 31st, 2023. Now I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, any questions from committee members? All right, seeing no questions.
Harold, you're on mute. I think Director Alvarez, I think Harold was trying to say something. He's on mute.
Yeah,
There you go.
I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay,
Thank you. I just have a quick question for the general manager. Do you believe that that this is good for us? It's good to go. You've looked at it enough?
Well, to answer the last part of your question, I definitely have looked at it enough, 7 days a week for the last several months. But yes, Director Williams, I think this is an excellent agreement. It's a bridge agreement. It recovers our cost off-site and a cost for the commodity that reflects actual costs. And it allows us a chance to discuss this question of ownership, which will be a separate issue to bring back to the board. But yes, I'm very happy, and I echo what Barkev said. A lot of work, but a great team effort. But it's a good contract for the district.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
any other board members have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, to the general manager, on page 6 of the packet, just for my edification, you show both the facility there at the Torrance Refinery. What are we talking about in terms of ownership? That all of those facilities would revert to the Torrance Refinery at the end of the agreement, or a portion of it?
Okay, let me answer that question. Again, really an excellent question, Chairman Alvarez. Like I said, this property there that's bordered by 190th Crenshaw, all the entire land, all of that is owned by the refinery. And we are a guest, or they are hosting us there for these two. This is what we call our Torrance, satellite plant. It has two components, like we said, the nitrified water and the boiler feed. In the nitrified water agreement, in those principles, those guidelines that were set back in 1994, it mentions that obviously there's a commodity and a fixed component. So the fixed component was to pay for the construction of this facility over 20 plus years, which expired, and they paid their last payment in July. The agreement, although it's not entirely clear, and that's why Steve and the attorneys have been looking at this, and myself, is that at the end of the agreement, the ownership of the infrastructure, the land is already theirs, they own the land, the infrastructure could inure over to the refinery. And that's what we're going to be discussing. And the next logical question, what would that mean for us? Let's say the ruling was, after mediation, that the infrastructure, that they did actually own it. It would bring up some further discussion about who and how maybe it would be operated. I think nothing would change during the course of this agreement if I'm hearing the folks over at the Torrance Refinery, but maybe in a longer term agreement, they might revisit that, the operation of that facility, or not. They might continue with the way it's going today. So, well, first of all, hopefully, does that answer your question about ownership? What we're talking about, the infrastructure, not the land.
For right now, I may follow up with you later on that. There's a couple of things you raised, but they're minor points. Just for clarification purposes, again, then 100% of the water that's treated here is used at the Torrance Refinery. So we basically use this asset for purposes of producing water for the Torrance Refinery.
That's correct.
Water produced at this plant is not used anywhere else in the system.
Nowhere else.
Okay. I'd like to get a little bit more feedback, if you don't mind, on this full cost recovery. On the issue of the variable rate, just the raw rate for the water, I know that we're going to basically charge on a 3-year rolling average. What is the current cost to produce the water? But not for the average of the last 3 years, but what's the current cost?
Well, the amount that if we can maybe go back to the previous, but the current cost is very close to what is in this agreement. That the 2021 rate was based on the preceding 3 actuals of, I would say that's 18, 19, 19, 20, 17, 18, 18, 19, and 19, 20. And those are actuals for power, labor, chemicals, maintenance, everything. And by doing the 3-year rolling average, you have a fairly close, very close, well, they're actual costs incurred. And that is used for the basis for setting the rate for the next year, okay? And our current costs are very close. Sometimes it go lower or a little bit higher, but it'll be very close to $1,000 an acre foot, unless there's a huge change in the cost of power or labor, which we don't see because we've been running this for quite some time.
And we probably don't have this now, and maybe we can have it for the board meeting. I would be interested to know what is the actual cost today, not the average of the last 3 years, just for comparison purposes. I understand the 3-year rolling average and the purpose of doing that, to even out any variabilities where you have some anomalies on a monthly basis that are just one-time hits.
Okay, so,
But what would, if we're looking at the current cost of production, what is that? And that, I appreciate you wouldn't have that now, but maybe we can get that to me later on.
yeah, we can get that. And Chairman Alvarez, just so we're clear, the 1,000 that were showed, so those 3 previous years, what I can get you is for this current fiscal year from July 1, 20th to, let's say, the end of, where are we at here? The end of, January, at least through December. So it would be for the first 6 months of this year.
Okay. There's also some discussion in the amendment about the capital recovery, and we're fixing our financing costs at 2.5%. Is that just going to be for the duration of this agreement, which is basically for the next 2 years?
Yes, that's correct.
So with respect to some of the projects that are listed in Exhibits B and Exhibit C that are going to be brought online in subsequent years. Some of these are the years 2024, 26, 30, etc. These are all then going to be revisited in 2 years when this agreement is redone. But there's no commitment to the capital costs that we're identifying in these tables for those future years to carry over to a future agreement. I guess that's my question.
Okay, so the question is that the 2.5% is not meant to be in effect for the long-term agreement past 2023. The 2.5%, I have Margaret on the line here if she wants to, or Barkev. It's meant to be just for the duration of this short-term agreement.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, those were my basic questions. The fact that basically we're looking at just it seems a carryover agreement for the next 2 years, that the biggest question is going to be the ownership issue and in terms of the facilities that are on Torrance property and who they would revert to. And that's going to be resolved in the next 6 months. It's not going to be resolved at the time that we execute this, but remains an open-ended question.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I don't have anything else. I see Director Houston, your speaker is on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Alvarez. I have a couple questions I wanted to ask since I have the opportunity, I guess. Well, the first one is, based on the volume of production and the water sales we have now, does anyone have an idea going forward in the next 2 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years on this refinery, this customer? Are they anticipating that we're going to be providing more water or less water? Obviously, things are changing very quickly with fossil fuels and so on and so forth, but can someone give me a thought on that? Because I haven't heard that. I hear status quo at this moment. So can someone just, let me know what the thought is?
Yeah, Director Houston, I can take that, and Barkev and anybody else wants to chime in. Well, you mentioned a few different, you're right, there is discussion out there on the long-term future on fossil fuels, 20 years and out, what that really would mean. And especially in California, where there's an edict right now from the governor to have all cars be electric by 2035. Those are the kind of things that are, when you think about the particular market that we're in. But as far as right now, we're serving them about 3,000 acre feet per year of nitrified water on average, about 3 million gallons a day, I believe. Check that number, Barker, but that's my understanding. And I don't see any change in the short term, Director Houston. Refineries, I mean, there's still a big demand for the 3 products that these refineries make, which is gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. So I'm not anticipating, I don't see it in any of the market indications that there's anything in the short term. And I would say short term, this decade. The next decade and the decade beyond could be something different. I don't know, we'll have to see on that. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but it is a good question. There's some speculation on the long-term future for fossil fuels and therefore the refineries and their need for water. And quite frankly, what would we do with some of this water that we're producing currently? Would we repurpose it or repurpose the facilities for some other application with some modifications, like groundwater injection, for instance?
Okay, great. So like I said, I understand this is just basically a 2-year extension, a bridge agreement. I think that would be one of the things that down the road we should understand. You know, what are the current owners of that refinery planning? What are they thinking? I haven't heard any of that, and I haven't heard it in the local press either, quite frankly. So I just think we need to understand the longer term potential, and that also goes into negotiations as to capital improvements, et cetera. The other thing, just for my own edification and maybe even for others who happen to listen to these meetings, what would it matter if we did not own the property at some point, or the equipment at some point? What would it matter?
Well, that's a good question. I don't want to speculate too much or play maybe our negotiating cards, but to answer your question, Director Houston, if we didn't own the property, the supply of water comes through us regardless. It starts at Hyperion, comes through Ed C. Little, and whatever kind of water we sell, I think we can be made whole no matter what. It just might be a matter of who exactly operates it, or where are you just buying the Title 22 water that goes through the refinery, or are you buying the nitrified water, which it has to be nitrified. I think those are the details. That's why we wanted to settle the ownership question, but we have thought about that. And I think just about most circumstances, I would say, could be favorable to West Basin either way. We're not entirely, wouldn't be negatively impacted, in my opinion. But we'd have to go through the details of those discussions in the eventuality that the ownership question was settled in the favor of the refinery.
Okay, good. Because again, I don't hear yet or understand why it may or may not matter. Obviously, there's a lot of things here where if we own it, we control it. You know, we can do what we need to do and work with them, of course. But on the other side of it, it may or may not really matter that much that we own it. We're still selling them the water. They can deal with certain things. So at least I think that's also something we have to understand. This isn't necessarily like we must own it. So I think it's an open-ended question. I think that, the last thing, because a lot of these negotiations happen, the board gets informed along the way, but we really don't understand a whole lot until it's before us. One of the things I think that should happen at some point is that we should maybe have a representative from the refinery to be at one of our meetings, just to at least talk to us, or to be with us when we talk about this, or to say, here's why we both agree this is a great agreement. Not just hear only staff. I'm assuming when these things come together, of course, the refinery would be in a positive and we'd be in a positive, but I think it would be good for us at some point, to hear from them as well, to hear from them firsthand and what's their vision, et cetera, and the working relationship. So, but that's just a comment, not a question. So thank you.
Okay, Director Williams, it looks like you want to say something.
Oh, I'm ready to move this to the board to approve staff's recommendation.
All right, before we do that, I do have one more question for the general manager. This is going back to exhibits B and C. When we look at the cost allocations, there is the cost estimates that are presented for the various improvement projects that are either in process now or will be built in the next short-term future. There's the Torrance Refinery allocation number, and then there's the adjusted allocation number. Can you expand on why the difference there?
Yes, and I think if for everybody, this is on packet page 53 and 54. Just want to make sure that's what you're looking at.
That is, page 53 and 54 is correct.
Okay, so, well, I can tell you, Barkev can explain this to you better than I can, but that's a good question. Explain the difference between the two allocations, Barkev. Quite straightforward.
Absolutely. Yeah, because of the fact that there are projects that benefit both product streams, the boiler feed, and the nitrified recycled water. So there's a project, let's say at Etsy Little plant. So from there you get an allocated what proportion of that project benefits all of the satellite plant, the Torrance Refinery satellite plant. And then from there, there's an adjusted allocation. A portion of that benefits the nitrified. That's the column that you were referring to, Dr. Albert. Does that make sense?
That does for those projects, I guess, that are supportive projects, such as at the Ed Little plant, and are the majority of the ones then on Exhibit B at the Ed Little plant or the Hyperion plant. On Exhibit C, like the backup power for the nitrified product water pumps, is that not at the Torrance Refinery?
It is over there. So you can see that the nitrified allocation of that one is about a little over half $500,000. What we did with, you'll see the footnote on footnote 9 there, we did escalate the cost from the time the estimates were first produced, and we escalated to when we think the construction of the project, the majority of the expenditure would happen.
Okay, so if I'm looking at Exhibit C, and that would be the first line, you got the Torrance Refinery allocation at $1 million. Is that the estimated cost of that project?
That was, yes.
And then the nitrified water allocation is $581,000.
Correct.
Why the delta? I mean, isn't all of that going to be for the nitrified water?
I think even though the backup power here, it does say for nitrified hour, there is provisions in there for recycle, but I can confirm on that, Dr. Alvarez, and provide an explanation.
Okay, because
But I think Barkev here, the backup power would be for both plants.
For both plants, yes.
The boiler feed, which is not part of this agreement, and the nitrified.
Correct.
but that would be the boiler feed at the refinery.
Correct, right next door. It's,
Right, 'cause
Yeah.
going back to the figure that we talked about earlier.
correct.
So Torrance Refinery would still be paying then 100% of that cost. Just part of it will be under the nitrification agreement, and we have a separate agreement then for the boiler feed water.
Correct.
Correct. That's a
And
separate agreement.
And that agreement is an agreement that's existing, or is that an agreement that you're negotiating? I don't know the status of it. Maybe you can just fill me in on kind of what's the status of that agreement.
Okay, so that agreement is expires in, like we were saying earlier, on August 31st, 2023. The boiler feed agreement and the boiler feed plant were built later than the nitrified, 3 or 4 years later, and they're kind of offset. And that has its own, different, obviously a completely different spec, a different O&M charge, and a different fixed charge that are incorporated into that agreement.
And so that agreement is expiring in 23. Is the intent then that the reason for this agreement being a short-term agreement is that both agreements would be melded into one agreement, since basically it's for operation of one plant to supply recycled water to the Torrance Refinery?
Director Alvarez, that's exactly it. And rather than having these offsetting agreements where there's some commonality, like the one you just pointed out, and it's also a lot easier from a business perspective for all parties to have the agreements on the same term. Not terms, but the term, the actual length of the agreement, the start date and end date.
Okay, so basically what we're really looking at is a short-term carryover agreement to align two agreements that will be melded into one for purposes of moving forward. And I think this would also go then back to some of the questions or issues raised by Director Houston in terms of long-term strategic value of that plant and operation, that we've got some time to look at it over the next couple of years.
That's exactly it. And go ahead. Sorry.
No, I apologize. Go ahead and finish.
Yeah, that's you've actually characterized it perfectly. And I think in 2023 we'll be looking at, including what Director Houston brought up, is for the new combined agreement. You know, how long should that agreement be? You know, what are the future projected demands from the refinery? We can get into it in a lot more detail at that point. Well before 2023, we'll be looking at that actually for the duration of the next 2 years. That's something we can, and part of that is discussed in the Recycled Water Master Plan, which we'll be bringing back here shortly. But yeah, that gives us a window of time here with this bridge agreement to think about those questions, but also to realize some efficiencies of bringing the two agreements together. There's a reason they were separate, because they were built at different times, but after now 25 years later, we can combine them and negotiate it. I don't see a 25-year term, quite frankly, although I don't want to be, I think I'm not saying that's for sure, but probably something a shorter term agreement with the refinery going forward.
Well, thank you for that, General Manager. I do think that we've got a lot of work to do in terms of just really looking at the Recycling Water Master Plan and just the overall direction of where we're headed, and using recycled water, what would be the best way to produce it and deliver it. And some of those items, all of those items actually should be addressed so that we have some clear-cut policy directives when these agreements then come back.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Okay, with that, based on Director Williams' recommendation to move this forward, I think we should just move this forward to the next board meeting. Next up on the agenda then is, what do we have next?
Okay, so yeah, that concludes the action item. So we're on to information calendar.
So the next item, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I just want to confirm this is moving forward with a recommendation.
It is moving forward with the recommendation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, on the information calendar, the next item up is draft scope of work for recycled water distribution system operation and maintenance services. That's the first item out of the chute, so to speak. So, General Manager, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Alvarez. This is a follow-up on our previous discussions, and I see one of our guests here is Dan Armendariz from Cal Water. Welcome, Dan. This item stems from the discussion at prior committee meeting regarding the O&M contract for the water distribution system, recycled water distribution system. And at the board's direction, we were asked to pursue putting this out for through a bidding process and to develop an RFP. But as an interim step, we were directed to just bring back the scope of services to get a look, to update the board and kind of what the scope might look like for the recycled water distribution system O&M, and with some of the numbers before we actually send out the RFP, which we plan to do very, very shortly. So this is a further request of the board to give some more details on what the scope might look like for the RFP. And so we have our operations supervisor, Frank Fuchs, that I see up there on the top of the screen. And Frank is gonna, I think, Frank, you have a PowerPoint presentation for the committee?
Yes, can you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, directors. So yes, as Patrick mentioned, the current agreement with California Water Service Company to operate and maintain the distribution system is scheduled to end June 30th of this year. And the board directed staff to develop a draft scope of work and present it to the board for review before issuing a request for proposals. And so, but before going through the scope, the draft scope of work, which is attached as part of this board memo, I'd like to just provide a brief overview of the distribution system. And so, as you can see here on your screen, this is an overall map of the recycled water distribution system. We also have included we show the West Basin distribution facilities, and I wanted to point out specifically those facilities that are part of the distribution system. And so we have the Torrance booster pump station, which also has a chlorine disinfection station. We also have the American Honda disinfection station, and we have the Dominguez booster pump station, which also has a chlorine disinfection station. And I also want to highlight that those pipelines are in red, those are recycled water pipelines. However, those pipelines are owned by California Water Service Company, so they would maintain those pipelines.
If I can interrupt, just a point of clarification. Those pipelines that you just mentioned are currently owned by Cal Water? Is that, did I hear you correctly?
That's correct, Director. Yes,
All
just
right,
that little, just a little red section that is with what is referred to as the Dominguez Technology Center.
All right, so it's just the one over on basically the southeast end. Is that it, or?
Yes, just those pipelines in there in red.
Okay, so those are owned by Cal Water and would not be part of the operations or the maintenance agreement. Cal Water would retain, as they own them, they will be responsible for the maintenance of them.
That is correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
go ahead. Apologize for the interruption.
Oh, no problem. All right. So then just continuing with the overview of the distribution system. Overall, the district owns and operates 103 miles of pipelines. And so the majority of those pipelines are tertiary treated, disinfected water that is conveyed. But I also want to highlight that the district also owns pipelines which convey brine, secondary effluent. That's the 60-inch force main that supplies secondary water from Hyperion to the Edward C. Little Water Recycling Facility. We also have some pipelines which convey barrier water, as well as nitrified water and single pass and double pass reverse osmosis water as well. We also have approximately 300 isolation valves, 454 air vacuum valves, and air vacuum valves are mechanical devices that are connected to the high points of the distribution system. And so the purpose of these air vacuum valves are one, to release air that is accumulated at these high points, and also to allow air to come back into the system if there's a sudden change in pressure. And in addition, we also have 389 blow-offs, and blow-offs are located at the ends of our system and also at low points of the distribution system to be able to flush water or drain water if needed. And then, as I had highlighted in the map, the district also has 2 booster pump stations and 3 chlorine disinfection stations. 2 of those chlorine disinfection stations are located at 2 of the booster pump stations. Then, so I just wanted to first go through the distribution system now. I'd like to just provide a brief overview of the scope of work, which is attached as part of this memo. So the scope of work, of course, is what potential contractors would use to identify the work that we're requesting as part of this solicitation. And that would be attached to the overall request for proposals. And so I've divided the operations and maintenance based on basic services and just emergency service, just to summarize the overall scope of work. And so under basic services, we would request the contractors to provide distribution surveillance. So we would want an operator on a scheduled basis to go throughout the distribution system and check for leaks or identify if there's any damaged or missing equipment throughout the distribution system. We would also want them to conduct water quality sampling on a scheduled basis as well. We have 30 different locations throughout the distribution system that we currently collect water samples at. We would also want the contractor to operate and maintain the appurtenances that I had mentioned, but for example, the isolation valves, we would want to have those exercised, and that entails opening and closing valves, essentially to extend the life of those valves, and also to ensure that they work when they are needed. There's also maintenance associated with air vacuum valves as well as the blow-offs. Of course, we would need the operations and maintenance support for the pump and disinfection stations that I highlighted before. Another significant component of the scope of work are underground service alerts. And so what these are is that before a contractor does any type of digging, they're required to provide advanced notification of the work area, and utilities with underground assets are required by law to mark the location of their assets within 2 working days after being notified. And so these notifications vary by month. So for example, over the last year, the monthly notifications vary between 459 to 974. Then moving on to repair and replacement, this is just an area that highlights a large component of the support. Again, this would be repairing or replacing any of the components of the distribution system that I'd already mentioned. And then also the next point, as needed distribution and technical support, that also would vary per month. So for example, for just as needed distribution support, we might request that an operator install pressure loggers at different points of the distribution system, or request that a meter service be turned on or off, or even check to see if there's a meter issue with a specific site. For technical services, we may need support to review design of a distribution system related project and provide feedback and recommendations for that design as well. And then of course, for emergency services, we would need the contractor, of course, to be able to respond 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. The contractor would need to demonstrate that they have the capabilities to respond and implement emergency repairs. So that summarizes the overall basic services and emergency services. For compensation, what we propose is that this be a time and materials agreement. This is how our current agreement is set up. The contractor would provide a labor rate schedule and any proposed markups of equipment for equipment, materials, and emergency repairs. Overall, the agreement would be a not to exceed cost, which is again how our current agreement is set up. So we would have an overall budget for this contract, and we would also include a budget for emergency repairs. So however, if the overall cost of, for example, of an emergency repair caused us to exceed our budget, then we would have to come back to the board to request additional funding. For the term, we recommend a 3-year term with an option to extend for 2 years based on performance. And so staff would come back to the board after the 2-year mark and make a recommendation based on the contractor's performance, either to go out for an RFP or recommend an extension. And of course, the extension would then be based on board approval. And this is an overall schedule for the anticipated solicitation process. We anticipate issuing the request for proposals the 23rd of this month, with the proposals due on April 6th. So that provides a contractor 6 weeks to develop their proposals. For the evaluations, it would be between April 6th and April 16th to evaluate those proposals, and also to conduct vendor interviews the week of the 19th. So based on the proposal evaluation and the interviews, staff would develop a recommendation and submit that to the Engineering and Operations Committee meeting by May 13th, and then subsequently to the board meeting on May 24th. If the board does approve that recommendation, we anticipate that we could have a contract completed by June 21st. So that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions in regards to the presentation or the attached scope of work.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Frank. Any comments from any of the committee members or any of the board members?
Mr. Chair, I have a question, and this is to Frank. You had said something about checking plans, plan checking. I didn't quite get that.
Yes, Director. We have done in the past is when we have pipeline projects or projects related to the distribution system. For example, if we were going to install a disinfection station, we would want to get feedback from the operator since they have the hands-on experience or they have more experience just working with those facilities. We would want them to provide any recommendation or feedback based on their experience.
But this would not be like the plan check for design of the systems.
No, it's not really a plan check, Director. Again, it's just we would provide them with a set of plans and ask them if they could review and provide any feedback. It could be from the locations of where certain valves are located, where the service laterals are connected. We would want them to provide feedback. For example, I mentioned the design of a disinfection station, even the location of where a truck would be able to pull up. We would want them to be able to tell us if just in their experience that makes sense. Things like that. It's not really a plan check, but it's more just to provide feedback.
Oh, okay.
It would be more of a constructability review from the operators that are out in the field and they understand the field conditions.
Okay, thank you. One last question. This is concerning the how would you administer this contract? How do you do that?
Again, it's a time and materials, as I mentioned, but we would have specific targets for work, Director Williams. So there's a section I can back up here in the presentation. So there's a section of the work that should be relatively constant throughout the month. So we would have scheduled meetings with the contractor to make sure that those scheduled maintenance items or operational items are being completed. And then we would work with them on any repair and replacement work that is being requested or recommended by the contractor. So based on monthly meetings and also monthly reports that they provide, Director, we'd be able to ensure that at least the routine operation and maintenance is being completed. And then based on meetings with the contractor and monthly reports, we'd be able to review any additional items.
Okay, so you do have protocols in place so that you can keep up with everything.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, any other questions from any other board members?
No, thank you.
Okay, I guess this is just some generic questions for the general manager. There are some fairly straightforward items in the scope of work. And I was just wondering, maybe we've got an operations department and operations staff. You might want to comment. We have a very limited number of meters. Why can't some of those activities not be done by our operations department?
So the specific question, Chairman Alvarez, is that we have a limited number of meters. When we say a limited number of meters, why can that be done by our own staff in terms of the calibration? First, before I go back to Frank on this though, but like for instance, our main mag meter going to magnetic meter going to DWP, any calibration for that, I'm sure, is outsourced to a company that specializes in calibrations of meters that size. And on the other ones, and I assume you're talking, Chairman Alvarez, about calibration or more than just calibration of the meters?
Well, on page 61, meter readings. There are only 11 meters. Reading meters is pretty straightforward. I'm just at some point, if you're looking at just kind of metrics and so on, and maybe it's a greater point, but we've got an operations staff, and some of these things are stuff that maybe our staff should be doing. The meter calibration, that's contracted out, and there are people who just come in and calibrate meters when they need when that's needed. But things like meter readings, water quality sampling, those kinds of activities might be something that we should be looking at our staff to do.
Okay, so what we can do for that, Chairman Alvarez, is Frank, you don't have to get this right now, but how many meters reads are we talking and how frequently? I assume they're all monthly. And, and then the other part of this, the same with the water sampling. I think you have a matrix for this. How often and where are they at in terms of sampling, and where are these reads at in terms of distance? What is the what's involved in that time-wise, and then delivering the samples to where they're to be analyzed, or some of them are field analyzed, I take it too, for chlorine residual. So unless you have it off the top of your head, can you just comment? You can put that together relatively quickly, I assume.
Yeah, I can put that together, and I can just provide just some feedback if you like on.
Yeah,
but go ahead if you want to give some feedback right now on the thought of you and your Sergio maybe doing this kind of work.
Right. Yeah, there's not that many meters as Director Alvarez mentioned. I think the thought was, we have an operator out there already. He can collect these samples, but we can definitely look at having our internal staff collect those meter reads. For the water quality samples, the majority of those are under air vacuum valves that are located next to streets, but would require removing the covers. But we can certainly look at to see if that's something that we can have Sergio, our operations technician, implement as well. But again, that's on a monthly basis. I know that takes a significant amount of time just from our current operator to go through and collect all those samples. And as far as the meter calibrations, again, yeah, that's something that we can definitely look at implementing internally as well, Director.
And Frank, how many operators do you have?
Well, in our operations department, we don't have any we have an operations technician. Sergio's his support is specifically to conduct site inspections and also provide oversight of the operations work for the distribution system.
Thank you.
Well, like I said, it's a very limited number, and it seems something that we might want to think about having our staff do. With respect to chemicals, purchasing of chemicals, we have a limited number of disinfection stations in the recycled water system, and got a lot more need for disinfection facilities at our treatment plant. Isn't this something that the district can maybe coordinate and purchase, or have our other contractor? I'm not quite sure how we purchase chemicals right now. Is that done individually by the two operation contractors, and the district is not involved?
No, well, the two main, well, if you're talking about the plant and the sewage, the vast majority of those chemicals contracts are through the district. We buy them and they accept them for delivery, and of course through their regular O&M they use them at the plant. As far as Frank, and I assume that for sodium hypochlorite the same is true. We have the contracts for those chemicals and we order them, and then the current operator at Cal Water we coordinate with them for the delivery, the safe delivery of the chemicals. Is that correct?
No, just to correct that, Cal Water currently schedules the purchase and the delivery of those chemicals.
Okay, so are they paying for them, or are we paying for them?
They pay for it through the contract, and then we pay after that.
Okay, so thanks for that clarification. So it's different from the Suez contract where we have about $9 million in chemicals. All of that comes through the district. How much of an annual spend is the chemicals here? It's very small, I know.
Yeah, I mean, we purchase about 500 gallons a month of chemicals.
I no disagreement that it's probably a smaller quantity of chemicals, but it just seems that if we're purchasing chemicals and we're purchasing a large quantity, that we might get a better overall price. And then the next question would be, if the contractor is purchasing these chemicals, are we then paying a markup on their purchase of the chemicals? Because then, you know, they're paying X and then we're paying 20% plus X. So that's an additional expense that could be avoided if you just add this to the overall purchase of chemicals. Scheduling the delivery is just calling up and saying, hey, we need them delivered next Wednesday at 8 a.m. or however the convenient is for the vendor to schedule that delivery and have somebody meet him there. Just thinking of some of these items that are included in here, it just seems like we have a lot of items in here that are not necessarily, they can be done by a operating contractor, but not necessarily required, and that they may be better and cheaper if just from a cost point of view, if the district did them, like you do buy the chemicals for the operation of the treatment facilities.
Yeah, well, there's certainly, as you pointed out, there are vastly different terms of quantities, but if we look at all of these smaller, I guess you could say it all adds up, but Frank, that would be another follow-up action. Just let's get a value of the cost of the chemicals, what the unit cost price is. Usually if they're delivered in smaller quantities, they cost more because you're not getting deliveries of 5,000 gallons, you're getting deliveries of 500 gallons, and then compare those to the main plant kind of costs and markup. What that comes out, what are we talking about in dollars, and also the time involved in doing that.
Okay.
We'll follow up on that one, Chairman Alvarez.
The other item, I guess I would have some questions that maybe you can give me some additional information on, would be on emergency services. This would be like when there's an accident or something, and one of the blow-off valves or a air release valve or some other facility that's above ground on the public right of way, but not on the street, off on the sidewalk where something gets hit by a car. How many of those instances do we have? And is that something that the district couldn't just have a contractor that's called out, like Doty Brothers or others like that would respond? Because a lot of these things are really the local public safety agencies that are calling in the damage.
Yeah, so we've been collecting, we have a table with leaks over the years, but I can say that over the last 3 years, we've had close to 10 leak responses that we've had to attend to, whether it be air vacs. Not all of them are just huge emergencies. Some of them are leaking service lines, but that do need to be attended to immediately, but we count that as a leak. So overall, it's on average 10 in the last 3 years.
So it's not that many, and this is something that a contractor would probably be the person that responds anyways. And looking at some of these past responses, they've been subbed out to people like Doty Brothers. So maybe we ought to look at not including that in here. It's a very limited number, and that's something that when a call comes in, we can have an on-call contract for maintenance services with a contractor that does the repairs. Just an idea.
Okay, duly noted.
I would just say that, or just add to that, that although a contractor could respond in an emergency, there is added value for an agency that could respond, that knows where the valves are, where the pipelines are, and that can provide a speedy response to an emergency, a small leak or a big leak that could end up to a loss and liability to the district.
Well, that's a good point, but I would hope that our staff would also be available for things like that and would be very familiar with our system.
Correct. And we do have one truck at West Basin that and one field technician that's responsible to do a multitude of things. So if we want to take that in, we have to kind of take a close look at making sure that we have enough staff to do all that.
Director Williams, you want to speak? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment concerning having the, I wouldn't say a luxury, but having the ability to, or not have to worry about these kind of things that you're talking about in a contract for maintenance operation. I come from a small city background where we were considered contract cities. I mean, there's a whole organization of contract cities that rely on having one contractor that take care of all these things. And the bottom line is we pay for this stuff anyway. So if we don't have to have down the line, we'll have to add another staff member to take on these little things as they begin to grow on us, that it's sometimes the bottom line is not always the best line. So I would stay away from bringing this stuff in house if it can be done outside with dealing with one contractor and not having to deal with a bunch of contractors plus subcontractors plus other subcontractors. Just I think it would be better to not start bringing stuff in house if it can be effectively handled by outside contractors.
Well, that's a very good point. I agree. I generally would, and I'm very supportive of contracting out the stuff that's makes sense to contract out and is cost efficient. But I also look at the fact that we do have an operations department, and it's got 9 positions in it, and it's got a manager. And so when I'm looking at the operations department and some of those positions, I think that for the level of work and just to have that internal knowledge of the system, that we would benefit from it. I don't, and I would never support hiring additional staff. And I look at the number of staff, and if I did a desk audit and a position audit, I can't see that I would ever justify hiring additional staff here.
Operations department as it stands today won't be able to handle 100 miles of pipeline and emergencies happening from the southern end of the distribution system to the north end of it. We are not set up currently to be able to provide resources should an earthquake happen and 42-inch recycled water pipeline were to break. It is
with all due respect, I understand that argument, but and I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but if you're going to bring that up, that's 100 miles of pipe. It's very passive, very limited number of service lines that are connected to that delivery system. And if there was a major earthquake, there would be a lot of other priorities for an operator like Cal Water that they would also be taken care of. And hopefully we would be very responsive in that event and be able to contract out and bring in a contractor to remedy the situation. So with the type of facilities that we're looking here, it's a pretty passive system. And I'm not quite sure I buy when I get thrown out these numbers of 100 miles of pipeline and 570 or whatever the number is of air relief valves, etc., as that being a very complicated system. So I appreciate your comments, but those would be my reply. So anyway,
I appreciate the contractor would also respond to the agency who's paying them first in such an event as well. So it'd be the same thing. So that'd be my response.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, that's a good discussion there. So we thank you for do you have further questions, Director Alvarez?
I was just going to say, Director Williams, were you going to say anything else? Because you're on, your microphone's on.
Oh, I'm done.
Okay. Well, if we can look at some of the comments that were raised and maybe modify the scope of work a little bit. I don't know if this item would be ready to be brought back to the board. There is a time sensitivity to it in terms of getting this out for bid and going through the proposal process and evaluation process. With that, if you think you can make the modifications and maybe we can look at them one last time, let's just go ahead and move this without a recommendation to the board.
Okay, we'll do that. Chairman, this is an information item at this point. So what we'll do is we'll take under consideration the suggestions by the questions that you raised and the comments of Director Williams, and get some numbers around some of those issues that were brought up. I'll just say my own experience and a long history in contract operations and operations period. There's always a fine line between, what is involved in a scope and having multiple entities be responsible for any eventuality like an emergency. It is generally better to have it under one shop where there's no finger pointing and there's no liability, regardless of how infrequent, because you don't know until the big event happens. But the questions are all very valid and very good, but let's quantify them, a little bit more in terms of the chemicals and the meter reads and what's involved in those. And I think we have enough time, even though I see you had a schedule here, anticipated solicitation process schedule on slide 5. You might want to put that back up. This is February. I think we can come back, Chairman Alvarez, with some of these tweaks and some more background information, then make a final direction from the board. Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So with that, maybe we can move on to the next item.
Yes, the next item is on the information calendar is item 6B. This is an item we brought before the board has been in 2019 and last year about the C. Marvin Brewer desalter update. I can't remember what C stands for, but just before I hand it over for a presentation, Chairman Alvarez and committee members and board members, the desalter was a project that was entered into back in, and I'm not going to go through all that because I think most everybody knows the history, but in as far back as 1993, with the idea of testing out technologies, namely reverse osmosis membranes, and testing out that technology to clean up brackish plume water. And there was a certain amount of grant money. It was actually a pilot study. It sort of morphed into a demonstration that then morphed into a kind of a full-blown plant, a long-term plant. And it had some, like I said, good grant funding at the beginning. It also had some O&M, like an LRP type funding. It was called GRP, which I believe stands for Groundwater Recovery Program. Same amounts of money, pretty much $250 an acre foot, that sunsetted in 2013. So we've been at this for quite a while. The plant has aged, and and equipment has aged. In there's been a new well drilled in the period from the mid-90s to now to replace 2 of the older wells. And like I said, the GRP has gone away, and we're sort of at a crossroads maybe. And I wanted to bring this to the board about what do we do next with this, with this facility. It has been, has a checkered past of performance for many years on and off, and it generally doesn't recover the cost of service. And I see Dan on the line here, Dan Armendariz from CalWater. CalWater is the owner of the property, the operator of the facility, and the customer for the water that we produce. So we just wanted to, again, you see it as an information item to get to the board, all eyes on the board, and to get you as the new member, Chairman Alvarez, kind of up to speed and kind of where we're at and provide some alternatives, more for input rather than a decision today, but to just get the latest and greatest information and also get you up to speed in some of the grants associated. There are almost $5 million in grants approved, but not executed for upgrading and or expanding this project if that was the direction we were going to go to. So we do have one of those fine junior engineers, a mechanical engineer that we talked about earlier, Jason Kong. And Jason has been over crawling around that plant and has made a big impact there in the last year. Has got to know an awful lot about it and has worked very well with Dan Armandares' team over there to try and actually come up with the basis for a lot of this analysis, which I think is very, very helpful in trying to decipher what we should do next. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, directors. It's nice to meet you, Director Alvarez. And thank you for the wonderful introduction, Patrick. Let's go ahead and jump right into the agenda. So Patrick brought up a really good point. We're kind of at a critical point in operation. We'll be looking at the initial purpose of the brew desalter. What was the original design for, and we'll look at some available alternatives in which to run the facility, taking into account some of these assumptions for future dollars. We're looking at the future numbers here, so what assumptions we've taken to get to those future numbers, and we'll wrap it up with Barkev coming in on the potential next steps and a overall summary of the different alternatives. So I'll get right into it. Covering the background first, we have a map of the Saline Plume on the right. It's a map of the West Coast Basin Saline Plume, and it's a result of the construction of the West Coast Basin Barrier Project in the early 1960s, which halted seawater intrusion, but unfortunately trapped a wedge of seawater inland. And so our brew desalter facility is located right where the red star is in the city of Torrance. And as you can see, it's located in the 1 to 5,000 parts per million chloride range, which is an indicator of salinity. And just a quick note about the plume, it's moving eastward at an average of 250 feet per year, or about 1 mile every 20 years. And the volume affected by the saline plume is approximately 650,000 acre feet. So it's quite a large area, as you can see on the map. And so we've been desalting brackish water from this saline plume since 1993. And for reference, brackish water has a total dissolved solids level of around 3,300 parts per million. Seawater is definitely higher at 30,000 parts per million, and potable a little bit lower than that at around 500 ppm. And so it's not as salty as seawater, but definitely saltier than potable water. So move on to the site a little bit more. There's a map on the bottom. It shows our brew desalter highlighted in the blue rectangle, right between a 5 million gallon storage tank on the right and Goldsworthy desalter, which is about 500 feet west of us. So just our nearby neighbor. So we're currently granted pumping rights up to 2,000 acre feet per year by the LA County Superior Court back in 1992, and that's about 1.78 million gallons per day. And back in 1986, there was this large drought, and Metropolitan ordered its member agencies to really reduce consumption of imported water. And West Basin was expected to reduce supplemental water deliveries or imported water deliveries by 20% in order to meet this water reduction. And so the district instituted a broad water conservation program, including new water development. This demonstration project was a major component to the district's program. And this project is a result of several studies commissioned by West Basin, which identify underutilized local sources of water supply. And so that was, back in 1986, right? And so operation began 27 years ago, almost 28, in July 1993 as a 5-year pilot program, as Patrick has previously mentioned, to evaluate this desalting technology. But we're currently being operated by California Water Service. And as I mentioned previously, it's brackish water desalted with reverse osmosis technology and blended with another potable water source in that 5 million gallon storage tank to the right. And since 2002, we've removed about 48,000 tons of salt, so quite a lot. Let's go ahead and move on and zoom in a little bit more on just the brew desalter. So you can see it in the map in that blue shaded rectangle, and it's outlined by that orange line, which denotes that the site is owned by Cal Water. The property is owned by Cal Water. The salter assets are owned by the district, and it's again blended with imported water in that large 5 million gallon storage tank before it gets to West Torrance through Cal Water. And I really want to highlight that this is a partnership between West Basin and Cal Water, where we pump out the water, treat it, and pass it over to Cal Water so they can serve it to their customers through their potable water distribution. So that potable water permit is permitted through Cal Water. And this partnership with Cal Water is laid out in the agreement attached in your packet. I believe it's page 75. You don't have to turn there right now, but I did want to mention that per the agreement terms between Cal Water and West Basin, at the end of the project, if Cal Water decides, if we decide to end the project, the Cal Water will have the first option to purchase the well. If Cal Water decides not to purchase the well will be abandoned in place. And this agreement is automatically renewed on a 5-year basis. I assume it's towards the 5-year pilot, but that was back in 1993. So unless the other party provides the other with written notice of intention to terminate, it just keeps going every 5 years. So let's go into a little bit of a chronological background. So going back to 1993, we had originally 2 wells that belonged to Cal Water, of course, and they're located right on the left of the map, Old Well 32, and then another one on the top right. I'm pointing at the wrong direction, I imagine, because of the mirror, but Old Well 33 on the top right of the map. So that was 2 wells with a combined capacity of 1,250 gallons per minute. In 2005, we constructed well 232, that light blue star right there in the shaded rectangle, to replace 2 existing wells at a capacity of 1,250 to 1,500 GPM. And in 2014, we replaced the stage 1 and stage 2 reverse osmosis membranes, about 252 membranes in total. And after that, the well capacity was reduced just because of the health of the well. So that triggered a well assessment, and that was completed in 2016. And as a part of that well assessment, it identified that a mechanical and chemical rehabilitation of the well was needed. So that was completed in 2019, as well as we upgraded the well motor and pump up to a 1,400 GPM capacity. And in 2020, more recently, we replaced 84, about 33% of the total number of membranes, 84 stage 2 reverse osmosis membranes. So here we have shown a background on kind of the financial history. It's very, it's got a lot of stuff going on, so I'll walk you through each step. This kind of covers our revenue versus O&M and production back to 1993 to 1994. And we have total revenue in green, and we have O&M expense in orange, and we have laid on top of that, of course, our production over the years. And so with that early drought that I had mentioned, the region needed to develop other local water resources besides just recycled water. So in 1991, Metropolitan conducted the Brackish groundwater reclamation study, which identified significant amounts of degraded groundwater in the region that were not being used. Metropolitan established a program known as the Groundwater Recovery Program, GRP, to encourage agencies by providing financial incentives for treatment of degraded groundwater for potable purposes. So the purpose of the GRP was really just to improve water reliability, water supply reliability through the treating of unusable degraded groundwater, and to increase groundwater storage for regional benefit. And so NWD provided a $250 per acre foot credit as part of their GRP program to offset the cost of operation and maintenance, which Patrick has mentioned previously. And unfortunately, in 2013, that GRP expired. So that's shown right there as in the arrow. That was in May 2013. And with the, sorry about that. With the expiration of the GRP, it really magnifies the approach that's taken to create a sustainable, operation point for the district. So let's go ahead and move on to some of the assumptions that we've taken for our future analysis. So breaking down, what exactly goes into consideration, right? We have expenses in orange, we have revenues in green. So under expenses, we have our replenishment assessment, which is a assessment paid to WRD on every acre foot that we pump out of the ground. And of course, we have our operations and maintenance costs, which we'll outline in further slides. But let's go ahead and jump into just the RA. So this kind of shows our historical numbers, how much the RA has cost in the past, from about 15 years ago in 2005, 2006, started at $128 per acre foot, and today it's $382 per acre foot. And again, it's a pumping fee paid to WRD on every acre foot that we pump out of the ground. And so we've taken those numbers and projected it towards the future years. So the ones that are darker shaded orange, those are assumed numbers based on last year's 4.66 increase. So now that we've covered the ROA, let's go ahead and look at some of the historical expenses. So we have in column A our production. Column B is our replenishment assessment paid to WRD. Column C is our O&M expenses throughout the years. We've taken both of those together and divided it by column A, our production, to get a unit cost for how much it's cost per dollar per acre foot, to operate this facility and keep it running. And so I've highlighted that middle row, 2014 to 2015, and we picked this particular year because it was a good representation year, a baseline to start from before the dollar per acre foot costs started to rise a little bit higher. You can kind of see that 887, before it kind of gets to the 4-digit numbers, it's a good representation baseline based on our historical numbers, what to go by. So we've taken that, used the 3-year average, and that gives us $753 per acre foot. And if you keep that 753 in mind, we've taken that and escalated it to the future years. So that 753 escalated at 2% to our future years, to 2022, 23, 2023 to 24. And those are the years that we've used for our analysis, these future dollars. So we covered all of the expenses. Let's cover the revenue side. So per the agreement with Cal Water, the desalted water rate charged to them is based on Metropolitan's Tier 1 cost, Tier 1 rate, excuse me, at $1,000 and $11.04, and Metropolitan's readiness to serve charge, which is an additional $100 on top, which brings us to $1,204 per acre foot for this calendar year. And for the next 2 calendar years, we've projected a 4% increase and a 5% overall increase for Metropolitan. So those are listed in the dark green. So I realize it's a lot of numbers. We'll break it down a little bit more. So before we get there, though, we'll cover a little bit more about the capital costs and grant funding that Patrick previously mentioned. And there's multiple different projects in there. So I wanted to cover real quick, how the facility actually works, what these projects might be related to. We can take a look at some of the individual elements, and so that way you have a reference point to where these improvements are proposed. So this is our process flow diagram for the facility. We'll start at the well. We'll kind of move clockwise around it. So the well's here, shown on the bottom left, and it passes through we pump it out of the well. We add a little bit of anti-scalant, pass it through a pair of cartridge filters to remove any suspended material. Then the water gets pumped through a reverse osmosis units through these high pressure pumps on the top left, and they remove dissolved solids, including salts. And then the water then goes through the degasifier to remove carbon dioxide and gets injected with sodium hydroxide to increase the pH, and is ultimately stored in the Cal Water's reservoir and mixed with potable water, which is then provided to West Torrance as drinking water. And so that's kind of like a quick overview of our facility. So now covering the proposed capital costs, or estimated costs for facility improvements. We've broken it down into kind of 3 different sections. We have on the top completed improvements, which was completed in 2019 for the well rehabilitation at a cost of $1.1 million. We've broken down the other 2, which are near-term estimated costs for facility improvements and long-term estimated costs for expansion. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in further slides on what exactly each project is and why it pertains to this facility. But overall, we separated them into 3 different tables for the future alternatives, which you'll see. They'll make a little bit more sense in the future. But the total estimated improvement costs identified in this 2015 condition assessment from Carollo is about $9.7 million. And as Patrick has previously mentioned, we have approved grant funding for about 50% up to $4.733 million. So before we get into that, let's look at some of the grant funding. So the grant funding is from Department of Water Resources as part of their Proposition 1 grant funding for the Water Desalination Grant Program. And we applied for the grant in March 2018, and we were awarded the grant in October 2019. And this grant really covers planning, design, and construction of potable water desalination facilities for ocean and brackish water. And there are some key grant agreement terms that I did want to highlight just for the board's consideration, that the district agrees to operate the facility for the useful life and construction and implementation of the project, and that reporting requirements continue for 5 years after the completion of the project. And the agreement is due to be finalized in March 2021 and executed in May this year. And I did want to mention again that the funding amount, the 50%, totals up to $4.73 million. So now that we covered everything that goes into the analysis, let's actually look at some of the alternatives. So we'll lay them out in 3 different alternatives, which is alternative 1, maintain the current mode of operation. Alternative 2, invest in facility improvements. And alternative 3, invest in facility improvements and expansion. And we'll look at all 3 of these alternatives with grant funding on the side as well, so with or without grant funding. So alternative 1, we have in here, of course, the completed improvements, the well rehabilitation at the 1.1 million. And we've taken into account some assumptions made on number 1, the uptime at 80%, and number 2, the projected sales, which will ties into the uptime as well. And we chose 80% just because it includes scheduled and unscheduled downtime, due to required cleaning of the membranes, sampling for compliance, and unexpected failures in equipment. And so with that 80% uptime, we have laid out in the table here. I apologize, it's a lot of information, but I'll walk through each step. It'll look very familiar by the end of the presentation. So in the middle, we have current mode of operation for alternative 1, and we have on the right the current mode of operation with grant funding included. So the only difference between these 2 is with or without grant funding. We have on the top all the expenses in orange and revenues in green. And then we have totaled up in annual net revenue. On the bottom, we have the same numbers, unit cost, unit rate, but we've divided it over how much production we anticipate to produce for that year. So you can see with alternative 1, with the current mode of operation, and these are annual costs, by the way, the district would be at a loss of $240,000 each year. With grant funding, of course, that helps a little bit. We would be at a loss of $195,000 per year. And if we look at some of the unit costs, that would be a loss of $278 per acre foot without grant funding, and with grant funding, that would be $226 per acre foot. And so that's alternative number 1. And we've also taken a look at kind of an alternative 1B, if you will, which is an uptime that more reflects on how we're doing in the last 6 to 8 months. And that uptime has been a little bit closer to 50% actually, not so much the 80, and that's due to some unexpected failures in equipment. So with that 50% uptime, that brings our projected sales down to 540 acre feet per year. And we'll take a look at the same table with that 50% uptime. You can see the costs are definitely a lot lower, right? The annual net revenue is lower than it was before. But the interesting thing is that because we're producing less, our dollar per acre foot cost is a lot higher at $343 per acre foot loss and $258 per acre foot loss. So to sum up alternative 1, the pros are that we continue to clean up the saline plume. We'll be continuing to reduce our reliance on imported water, and there are no major capital investments needed. Though on the cons, the cost of service is not fully recovered, as you saw in the previous tables, and the reliability and uptime is reduced. So that sums up alternative 1. For alternative 2, now we're looking at facility improvements. So that includes the near-term estimated costs, that green table that we saw before in the middle of the page. So that includes the electrical upgrade for the plant and a variable frequency drive upgrade for the well, which is very, very crucial. And some upgrades on the programmable logic computer. The PLC is definitely outdated back from the 90s, of course. That includes a plant-wise noise reduction, interstage booster pump addition to help our recovery in our second stage to boost up that pressure a little bit more. A new degasifier and carbon dioxide scrubber package system, and miscellaneous site and system improvements, which include, well pump shelter. As you saw in the picture, our well is currently sitting outside uncovered, and some safety upgrades as well, which is upgrading fans in the building for better hydrogen sulfide removal, a permanent chlorine tanks location. Right now it's a temporary location, and some safety improvements also, like outdoor lighting in the well area, and replacing our sump pump that transfers our waste from the plant over to the brine tank. So the assumptions that we've taken into account for alternative 2, of course, an increased uptime of 85%. We have some new equipment coming in. We anticipate a higher uptime, and a projected sales that would reflect that, up to 1,047 acre-feet per year. And so we'll look at the similar tables from before. So we have in the middle, invest in facility improvements, alternative 2 in the middle, and then with grant funding on the right. So investing in facility improvements would bring us an annual net revenue of $308,000 loss per year for the district, and with grant funding, that would be a $141,000 loss per year. If we divide that over the production, our unit cost is now closer to $300 per acre foot, and $135 per acre foot with grant funding. So pros on this alternative 2, we have improved system reliability, we have reduced downtime, and we will, of course, continue to clean up the saline plume and reduce reliance on imported water. But on the con side is there's no added redundancy with these improvements. It's best to keep in mind that this plant was originally designed as a 5-year pilot, so not a lot of redundancy built into the facility. And also the cost of service is not fully recovered, as you saw in the numbers in the table. So alternative 3, invest in facility improvements and expansion. So we have the same near-term costs from alternative 2 included, and we've also added in now the long-term estimated cost for facility expansion. And of course, this includes everything from previously. This is kind of an all-in-one package, if you will, and includes the well rehabilitation costs. So for long-term costs for facility expansion, we have included drilling and installing a new well, as well as a pump and motor to go along with it, and adding in a second reverse osmosis train, bringing up our capacity 1 million gallons per day. And so that totals up to the 9.7 that we saw earlier. And then for assumptions with this one, we've increased, of course, our percentage to 90%. Now we have some redundancy in place, and we also have built in, some of that scheduled downtime and the cleaning and sampling, of course. And then sales definitely increased as well. We're on most of the time when we have more additional capacity and redundancy, bring us up to almost 2,300 acre-feet per year. And of course, this assumes a revised capacity from the original 1992 Court water rights. Previously, or currently, we have 2,000 acre-feet capacity. This would require us to return back to the LA Superior Court and request a 2,655 acre-feet per year capacity. We'll look at some familiar tables, of course. So we have in the middle, invest in facility improvements and expansion, and we have that option with grant funding on the right. So this, of course, is the largest one at $600,000 loss per year for the district. And with grant funding, that would be about $240,000 loss a year. And if we were to divide that over the production, that brings us a loss of $261 per acre foot without grant funding. And with grant funding, it's a $105 loss per acre foot. And so the pros for alternative 3, we of course increased salt removal from the saline plume. We have increased production and further reducing the reliance on imported water. The con is that it's the highest capital investment required. and the cost of service is not fully recovered. So I'll pass it on to Barkev to go over the potential next steps to kind of outline and summarize the presentation.
Thank you, Jason. And going on to the next slide. Again, like Jason said, we're bringing this to the board for consideration. Take a look at the dollar amounts, the economic analysis that Jason put together here. And in looking at what could be the next potential steps, it's important for us to kind of take a look at what the dollars are saying, what the data is telling us. So in this slide here, this one's a summary of the 3 different alternatives that Jason presented. Again, you can see here, assuming we can achieve the 80% uptime. Again, more recently, it's been more like 50%, but assuming we can get an 80% uptime and maintain current mode of operation, we would still be at a loss of ranging between $226 per acre foot to $278 per acre foot. Even if we invested in the money with the grant funding, that takes it down to $135 per acre foot. And if we were to expand, if we were to go back to the court and get additional pumping rights to increase the uptime and provide more water, we're looking that going down to $105 per acre foot under alternative 3 over on the way right of the column there. So with the theme of recovering cost of service, none of these alternatives really recover the cost of service under the current conditions. The next slide, please. So in summary, just to summarize what we went through, there's a lot of information put out there, but the key factors to consider here, West Basin received the right to pump 2,000 acre feet from the LA Superior Court in 1992. We started this project as a pilot program, but continued on in partnership with Cal Water. West Basin owns assets on site versus Cal Water, as Patrick mentioned, is the property owner, operator, and customer for the water. The alternative analysis touched on status quo operation for alternative 1, making some facility improvements with and without grant funding, and then investing into facility improvements and also expanding, which would require us going back to the court and petitioning for additional water to extract from the groundwater. And again, all those 3 alternatives with the agreement we have today, we wouldn't be recovering the cost of service. And ultimately, there is the grant funding, and DWR is hoping that we can, if we were to proceed with making the investments in the facility and using the grant funding, we hope to finalize the scope with DWR by March and execute the agreement in May. So there's a commitment that would, by the district, if we were to do that, to proceed with the project for the remaining useful life of the new facilities that would be constructed. So thank you, Jason, for the analysis. We'd like to open it up for discussion for the board members.
Okay, any comments from any of the board members, committee members? No comments?
I have a question. I know that WRD has a desalter nearby, and I think it's called the Goldsworthy desalter. Anyone know about that?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
in fact, we have a slide, if you just bring that up, that just shows that location while we're entertaining Director Williams' question. Go ahead.
How are they doing over there? I hear that WRD they're really prancing around, singing the praises of their desalting efforts in the that same groundwater basin, right? That's the West Basin, right? And so, how far are they from us?
Not very.
They're right, just a few hundred feet away. We have a actual, if we can bring it up, a picture of that.
400. They're about 400 feet away from the well.
Yeah, just
Wow.
across the fence, actually.
Yeah. Do you know why they are not going after this to try to buy it from us or whatever?
Well, there's a lot in that question. I can't speculate as to how their operation is going over at Goldsworthy, but I know it's had its own, challenges operationally. But that is one of the issues I think of concern is.
Excuse me, this is Don Deere, may I speak? This is Don Deere, may I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, about over 10 years ago, they made an offer to buy it from us for $1.
For
Their
$1?
offer yeah, that was their offer. That's the last time they offered to buy it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I'm still kind of concerned about the brewer desalter. I haven't. It's not that dear to my heart. So, but I will wait to hear from my colleague Alvarez on this. I bet he has some interesting comments. So, thank you.
Well, before I have any comments, I see Director Houston. So Director Houston, do you have some comments?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Alvarez. I have a number of comments, but I have a feeling I think we're all going to sort of agree on this to a degree. First of all, I want to say thank you, Jason. It's an excellent presentation. It's a very long and tough subject. So, and I believe anything that we discuss has no reflection upon what your abilities were and have done. I think you did an excellent job. So I just want to be very upfront with you. I will say also, I wish we would have had a physical piece of this presentation in our possession, because obviously I'm having to toggle between two screens to look at this and get dumped with all this information. But, I remember when this really had a hearty discussion, and it's probably been about 2 years ago, give or take, whatever it was when we were in a similar meeting, and the question came up, was like, what in the heck are we doing with this? What is the history of this? And it seemed to me that the board hadn't been enlightened on that in some time. So I'm glad that we're having it, and I'm glad that it's very candid with these numbers you presented, because it looks to me like a no-win situation. I think I guess I have two things just to go with up front. One would be, is there a way that we do not get contracted into this grant? It sounds like it's not a finalized thing yet. Is it too late to back out of the grant?
Yeah, I'll answer that question, Director Houston, and some of your other comments. So the grant is not executed. It was applied for several years ago, but it's coming up to the point where we have to make a decision. Well, the grantor DWR is wondering, are we going to proceed with this grant or not? But to your question, no, we are not bound to this grant, and so until it's executed. And the one, maybe you can go back to that presentation or part of your presentation, Jason, that shows some of the, the different components covered by the grant, which is relevant to my answer. That shows that we've already, back years ago, re-drilled a well. That new well for $1 million is eligible for grant. So 50% of it would be eligible for grant support. So one option potentially would be to, depending on what the board direction we get on this, but like right there where it says completed improvement, that $1.1 million at the top is eligible for grant funding. Executing the grant obliges you, though, to continue operation for a given period. You can't just get the grant and say, I've changed my mind and
Right.
Okay, so that's been running for a few years. That's one consideration. But just directly to your question, no, we're not obliged, but we're probably at a point where we need to tell the DWR, because we do very, very well in the grant arena with number of parties, to make sure our reputation is good, that if we're not going to use it, we've decided.
Let me just interrupt and move forward, because that was my number one thing is I'm really concerned that if we move forward, accept this grant, then we're stuck with that back end obligation. So, I mean, just on the very outside looking in, to me, I would be like, every option you presented us, we lose money. Every option doesn't make any sense for us. And this is a small piece of what we do. So I don't quite frankly understand how we could justify that to our ratepayers. So for what it's worth, in my mind, I would want to cut my losses and just move on, and it is what it is. We had a loss, but we've been going down this hole for years and struggling with this thing. And the other question would be, can we still maintain the rights, but lease those to somebody else who might utilize them and still at least have that, that we still hold on to?
Yeah, and that would be part of the next step evaluation if we decide not to move forward. What happens to the rights? What happens to the infrastructure and the assets that we have over there? How would they be disposed of or salvaged? Could we transfer it? All of those questions, I think, Director Houston, that's a good question. What is what would be the disposition of all of that stuff, infrastructure, rights, and anything to do with this project? We would have to come back with the board on that.
Sure. Okay. So again, I'm just going to say I appreciate staff putting those numbers in front of our face that show a loss on every option. And of course, I think those are probably a little bit rosy too, because they're based on that average that you guys selected, understandably so. But I would say that both the board members and members of the public that think that these projects are wonderful projects, we all got to understand what the bottom line is. So I do look forward to what Chair Alvarez has to say, but I just don't see a good endpoint here. I would want something presented to the board to vote up and down or whatever, and look at the options to support it or not support it. But I'm very dismayed that we've spent so much money and effort on this, and it doesn't seem to be panning out. So, but those are my comments for now. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I have comments. This is Don Deere. May I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I remember, again, I'm thinking back over 10 years ago, it was commented on that it was an advantage for West Basin to have pumping rights in the district. And that's, well, how much that's worth, I don't know, but that was an opinion at that time. That's all.
Any other comments? I appreciate the presentation. Actually, a lot of good numbers there. I do remember this project going way back, and the project, as was mentioned throughout the presentation, was started out as a demonstration project, and during a drought, it was reduced the reliance on imported water by increasing local water supply.
Again, battery ran up.
I'm sorry? Well, anyways, so the idea was it was going to be a short-term project. It never was going to pan out, and the only reason that the project broke even or made a little bit of money was because of Metropolitan's subsidy through the GRP program. Once the GRP program goes away, as the chart in the presentation dramatically shows, all of a sudden you can really see that the project doesn't pay for itself. So only when it's subsidized. I don't think that the purpose of the project is really what the purpose of the West Basin is. And the purpose of the project, if you will, is really to clean up the saltwater plume that was trapped behind the barriers once the barriers were put into effect and the saltwater intrusion was stopped. And that is an activity for the Water Replenishment District. They are undergoing a program where they're going to be expanding facilities to deal with that saltwater plume that is there. And that saltwater plume has been diluting. If you look at it today versus what it looked like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, etc., quite a bit of salt has been moved and the plume has spread out. So just by that dilution factor, at the leading edge of the plume right now, it's not quite what it was when you looked at it years ago. And that plume has moved in a south and easterly direction. And that is the direction it's migrated in. The project itself doesn't make any economic sense. We'll always be subsidizing it unless we found a user for the water that was willing to pay for the full cost, and that's not the case. So I would not support moving forward with the grants. I don't think that chasing that money that's going to cost us additional money is worthwhile. And I doubt that those grants can be repurposed at this time, but I don't have any problem with giving up that money because if we take any of that grant money, we're locked into this project for a lot longer time, and we're going to just be subsidizing it, and it's not something that is really in the mission of West Basin. Plus, when you look at the activities that WRD is undertaking to clean up the saltwater plume, we're basically repeating some of their activities and really not worth the while. So I would not support moving forward with the grants, and I think we ought to move forward to how to eliminate or divest ourselves of the facility that we have there now. Those are my overall comments. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments, but in terms of just guidelines, I think you've heard from at least the members of the committee and the board that it doesn't seem like it's worthwhile to continue in this project.
Correct. So, yeah, Chairman, I'm sorry, I see Director Houston has his mic on. Director Houston, do you want to come?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that looking at whichever entities we should obviously be discussing whomever might be interested in taking this off our hands, if you will. So obviously WRD is a player. Cal Water is probably a player. Again, I don't know any of the legalities of this, gentlemen, but at the same time, I think that our job is not groundwater. Our job is surface water and water we're importing, et cetera, and recycle water. So, I just don't see us moving forward any further. Just cut our losses, move on. I respect the work that's been done here up to this point, especially too with the, applying for grants and dealing with that. But, we also have to just be realistic. And lastly too, we, even in this conversation, we haven't talked about, again, the big picture of the regional water plan in this region. So you've got WRD doing things, you've got MET, you've got us, you've got LADWP, and, how all this plays into it. But us, screwing around with some little well, I don't think it behooves us any further. So, those are my comments again. So thank you.
Okay, if any other comments, I think you've got some direction, General Manager, so you might want to repackage this and just kind of give us a summary report later on. We can revisit this.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman Alvarez, we've taken all the input and the conversation under consideration. I think what we come back with now is to answer the several questions. Obviously, there's a desire to, in the words of Director Houston, cut our losses, and but we needed to think about what is the proper way to do that with the what's the value, who's interested, if there is any interest, what's transferable, what's salvageable, and we'll bring that back probably next month, and we will not be executing any contract. We'll have to relay that message to DWR, in a polite manner and thanked them for their support. But at this juncture, we're going in a different direction. But we'll come back with more information and a specific action item for the committee and board, Chairman Alvarez and committee members. Thank you.
Director Williams, your mic's back on.
Oh, I just wanted to say that great discussion, and it was an information item, and we got a lot of good information. So with that, I'm going to have to get off the program now and take care of some other business. So again, but thank you for allowing me to participate today. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
you're going to be leaving us? Director Williams, you're going to be leaving us now?
Yes.
Okay. Director Houston, you're staying, so we still have a quorum for the committee. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here, so thank you. And by the way, staff, at some point, can you send me a copy? I'm sure you'll send it to all of directors, but a copy of the presentation today. That would be great. You know, a physical copy.
Okay, will do.
Okay, so and just one last comment, if I could, on that. You know, the Goldsworthy plant was installed there at the same time, and the whole purpose of WRD putting in the Goldsworthy plant was in part motivated because West Basin beat them to the punch with a brewer desalter, but was to clean up the saltwater plume that's trapped behind the barrier. So they built that facility there. They can continue to operate it for cleanup purposes. Okay, with that, I hadn't realized how late it is getting in the afternoon. It's almost 4 o'clock. We've had some great discussion, some very good presentations. Staff's done a very nice job.
Thank you.
I don't know, and I appreciate the fact that there's a lot of items. So we have 4 more items left to discuss in terms of on the information calendar. Those will probably take a long time. Maybe you can pick of the 4 which one you think is the most important one to cover, and then we can postpone the other 3 for another time.
Yeah, we can B, C, D, and E. We can probably receive and file. That'll be part of the board package. But I would pick one, the last one. Item F to close out the day, Chairman Alvarez, if that's okay.
That's fine with me.
Okay. So this particular item, we talked to the board a little bit about this back in December, which pertains to, we have an agreement with the city of Los Angeles. That is the LA Department of Water and Power and the Los Angeles Sanitation District to evaluate different types of technology through a 3-way agreement that would improve water quality to our plant, our NC Little Water Recycling Plant in the city of El Segundo. So it's sort of the foundation of our whole water recycling program is the water coming from Hyperion, the quality and quantity of that water. So we've been in this program, signed this contract at the end of 2017, 2018, or beginning of 2018. And more recently, it's been moving along quite slowly. The site of the pilot tests that this agreement addresses is at Hyperion. And so it's designed and operated and maintained by LA Sand and co-funded by the 3 parties. So in December, we'd been talking to them, and they said that the schedule has slipped and the budget is increasing, and they put that in front of us when we mentioned or brought that up at a capital program update in December. So we're coming back today with more details on the particular request. And also, of course, there's a discussion which the board is aware of that I've engaged the city of Los Angeles and particularly LAWP, DWP, as we were asked for more money and continued funding of this project. It's obviously directly connected to improved water quality, but also to ensure that we get the water in the first place, that we have a supply of water out of Hyperion. That refers to the contract agreement for secondary effluent purchase from the city. So with that, this is just kind of to get you up to speed where we're at. It's also an information item, just like the others, but I think there's a lot of valuable information in here. And Barkev can run through the highlights quickly to sort of get the board up to speed. Please, Barkev.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. Board members, if I can ask you to turn to page 145 of your packet for this information item. As Patrick mentioned, we brought this up at the December E&O committee and wanted to come back and provide a little bit more detail. Again, as Patrick mentioned, realizing the need for the improved water quality of the secondary effluent that we, West Basin, get from the city of LA, we entered into a memorandum of agreement. We entered into Patrick, I think your mic is on. We entered into a memorandum of agreement with LA Sanitation and Environment and LADWP on January 18, 2018. A copy of that agreement is on page 151 in the packet. The agreement term ends on December 31st, 2021. The three agencies, West Basin, LADWP, and LA San, agreed to take initial steps to potentially convert a portion of Hyperion plant at the time to MBR technology. Those initial steps were converted into 4 specific tasks in the agreement. Those task 1 was to design and build a pilot MBR system with LA San taking the lead. And then task 2 was to perform the pilot study to inform the viability of the MBR system as a pre-treatment ahead of advanced treatment purification. And upon demonstrating the success of the technology to stakeholders and to regulating agencies, develop a feasibility study and environmental documentation for the proposed treatment conversion. It is clear, if you look at the agreement, it's very clear that the current agreement states that each of the 4 tasks would be performed with the ultimate goal of sending 70 million gallons per day of MBR water to West Basin, 54 million gallons of which would be to satisfy existing and future West Basin customers, and 60 million gallons would be routed back to LADWP's West Side recycled water system. So that was in
If I could interrupt you for a second, Burkhart,
Sure.
can you go over that again? It's
So
70 MGD to West Basin, but of the 70 MGD, 64 goes back to LADWP?
16.
16.
16.
Yeah.
54 to West Basin, 16 to LADWP.
It's the mask. It's the mask, Barkev.
16.
I heard it the other way. That's why when I heard that, I said, wait a second. So excuse my apology.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, 54 to West Basin, and then through West Basin system back to LADWP customers, 60 million gallons per day. 16, yeah. So that was in 2018. Within about a year of that, Mayor Garcetti's announcement came in February 2019 to reuse 100% of the secondary effluent. And that announcement really recalibrated the city's goals and really looked at a couple of new initiatives. One initiative is called Hyperion 2035. The other one is called Operation Next. Hyperion 2035, they both achieve the same goal of producing the 100% recycled water from Hyperion. These initiatives would see to deliver that water to various areas within LADWP's service area for indirect and potentially direct potable reuse. So while these initiatives were developed and given a go, the goals in the current agreement were not modified or updated to align them with the city's new objectives and initiatives. In the current agreement, the cost of the pilot project was estimated at $13.2 million. Of that $13.2 million, $8 million would be for the construction, one for the testing, another one for the feasibility study, and another $1 million for the EIR. And then there was another 20% contingency added to that for a total of $13.2 million. So how's the project going so far? They initiated the design in October 2019. After several iterations, the packages were ready in March 2020. LA Sand initiated construction phase procurement and issued notice to proceed for the construction in June 2020. Also worth noting that a workshop with the Division of Drinking Water was conducted in July 2020, and an independent advisory panel facilitated by the NWRI was kicked off in last September. Most recently, in November, we received a breakdown of the latest cost estimates for the project, and which is now to the tune of almost $19 million. The city also informed us that the end date of the project would be around February 2023. They think they're going to get construction done by September 21 this year, get the testing completing by September of next year, 2022, and then finish up the project documentation by early 2023. They've also explained to us, they submitted a memorandum that's attached to the report, some of the reasons of why the costs have increased from 13.2 to almost $19 million. And those key factors are included in the report on the bottom of page 147. And the reasons range from, significantly underestimating some of the costs, scope additions, the original cost did not include escalation, and then also COVID-19. What does this cost increase mean to West Basin? If you look at the top of page 148 in your packet, you will see a side-by-side comparison of what the cost was and what the cost is today. What this means is that West Basin's contribution to the project would go up by $1.9 million from 4.4 originally to 6.3 million. Because of the extra costs and the city's recalibrated goals, the city is seeking an amendment to the current agreement. Their goal with the amendment would do three things, and those are listed on the bottom page of page 148. The three things are to extend the term to December 31st, 2023. That's one. Two, they would want to revise the task plan and scope to better align the objectives of the pilot projects with the city's current goals and initiatives. So they are proposing, for example, to remove the feasibility study task and the environmental documentation task, and have the supply to West Basin be addressed under the overall programmatic EIR that they plan to develop for Operation Next. And then the third thing would call for the additional contributions, the additional funds from each of the agencies. So with that, we wanted to provide the committee members with additional information and open it up for discussion and for questions. that concludes my reporting.
Okay, are there any questions? Or General Manager, do you have any other comments you would like to make?
Chairman Alvarez, no, not at this point. I'd like to entertain any questions or comments that the committee members have.
Director Houston, do you have any comments?
Well, I don't think I have a comment at this moment. I might in a minute. I probably want to hear what the others have to say. I guess one thing I did notice on here in item 2, it says here about midway through that paragraph, the state is prepared to address the delivery of future MBR water to West Basin, blah, 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 at no cost to West Basin. What exactly does that mean in there, that line?
Director Houston, what packet page was that on?
Well, I'm looking at the one that's right here on the screen.
It's
That's,
item number 2 on page 148.
Yes, the at no cost to West Basin would be, what they are proposing is, let's not do task 3 and 4, which is the feasibility study and the EIR for 70 MGD delivery. Let's not do that, which was in the original agreement. Instead, we would cover the delivery, we would address the delivery to West Basin, any future delivery into West Basin under the overall programmatic EIR that they would be developing for their operation next, which is the 272 million gallons per day.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll hold for now, Chair.
Okay, so a couple of questions. The 70 MGD plant, if you build the MBR for 70 MGD, that's predicated on actually having to do the pilot study? Or am I?
Yes.
In other words, can we just bypass the pilot study?
Well, the agreement that was entered into, that predates me, but that was the agreement, was to use the pilot study to determine what technology would be, what type of MBR would be used, and to characterize the water and all of that. That's what's in that agreement, which is a little bit strange, but that's the way it's written. If you want to step out of the agreement, for instance, you still pay the full $4.4 million. But the full intent was to get the results from the pilot study, and that would inform the design of that first kind of MBR that they were contemplating in this existing agreement. Like Barkev has mentioned, is now they're looking at recycling all of the water since 2019, or all of the available water from Hyperion 100%, which is slightly changed, or like the term that Barkev used, they recalibrated their goals a little bit. So, but yeah, Chairman Alvarez, yeah, the idea was do the pilot study first. Could we, I mean, it's their, MBRs are built on their site. They're in the would be built on their site. So they're in the driving seat in that regard.
Okay. Where are they now? Exactly where is this pilot study? Is it still kind of in a design phase? Are they in a procurement phase? Where are we at the pilot study, and how much money has actually been spent? Not committed, but spent.
I'll let Barkev
maybe we don't know that.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, so
maybe we don't know that, so it'd be a question if we don't know it. But if you do know it, I'd like to know, because I've been hearing a lot about the pilot study, but it's like,
right.
Where are we? Because that pilot study's been going on for a while, and it just to me seems like it should be in process. If it's not, then why not?
So we have spent, or actually sent money to the tune of $1 million to the city of Los Angeles thus far. That's how much money we spent out of our $4.4 million allotment. Now they're asking, of course, today for a lot more, but how much has actually been spent? That would be $1 million. As far as, I'm sorry, beg your pardon?
By us, but how much has been spent by the city of LA, since they're the lead agency on this? And maybe we don't know, that would be a question.
Well, I think Barkev has the answer to that, but and then as far as where it's at, I think they're expecting to have construction of the pilot completed in September of this year. Actually, okay, do you want to add to that?
Yes, they have, the LA San has, they went to their board and got approval to proceed with the construction of the project, even with the higher costs. And they have issued purchase orders to the tune of $15 million for those vendors to start bringing in the equipment. So that's where the project is right now. And like Patrick mentions, we did spend $1 million ourselves. The way it works is that LA San would administer a fund, and each agency would initially contributed $1 million, so they have $3 million. As soon as that $3 million gets down to 30%, LA San will ask the agencies again to replenish the funds.
Okay.
So they're at that point right now. So I don't have the exact dollars of how much spent by all the agencies, but it's around that range, around the $3 million range.
So do you have a schedule for the pilot plant? I mean, you just mentioned that they've issued $15 million worth of purchase orders for procurement purposes, and that's to different vendors. So they didn't just contract this out to either a design firm that's running the pilot study that will be responsible for building it, or to a contract operator that's going to do it for them. Maybe you can fill me in. How is it being done, and do we have a real schedule for the pilot plant?
We do have a schedule, and we can send that over to the board members. Also, yes, they did hire a team of Corollo and Stantec, who I believe their fee is around $2.8 million to prepare the design packages and help LA San administer the testing and the pilot program. And then the procurement did go out to multiple vendors. There's additional details added to that, who are the different vendors provided in the memo at the end of this report.
What page is that?
And we can certainly provide additional details on those as well.
Can
That
I,
is on the memo is on page 175.
okay. Can I interject for one second, Mr. Chair? Yeah, because I'm looking at those pages toward the back now. I don't know who provided these pages to us. Is this directly from sanitation, but page 175 and going beyond that? Where did
Correct. This is a memorandum prepared by LA Sanitation and submitted to West Basin with the request to prepare an amendment to the agreement.
Okay, so this is part of whatever else you could send us, but this is right here from them.
Correct.
And I see on page 176, it has under 4A, it says terms of the agreement, and it lays out at least somewhat of a schedule right there. Yeah. Pilot testing October 2021 to September 2022. Final project documents February 2023. I mean, that's obviously if everything, I assume, goes as planned. So maybe that's part of what Chair Alvarez was also wanting to know.
Yes.
So that is here in front of our face. But I don't mean to interrupt you, Chair, but I wanted to ask that question, what these documents were, because I'm sifting through them as well.
Okay, I didn't realize that they were that far ahead. I didn't get a chance to look through this whole package. So maybe some of that information is here. So it says mobilization of contractor in November. Have they really mobilized the contractor? Because just time-wise, I'm always a bit curious and about really people meeting timelines, especially on projects like this.
Yes, I can get verification on exactly what tasks they're doing right now with the construction. I know that they've started the construction phase, but be happy to get more details on the specific tasks that are going on site.
in terms of our involvement, we've been pretty passive. We just basically write the check, and LA San is the one that has been basically managing the project in terms of retaining the consultants and procuring services and equipment, etc.
And during the design phase, we were active with them in terms of when the designs were being prepared, they submitted drawings to us, we reviewed them, provided comments back, that kind of a thing. But yes, LA San is in full control of the project, with them updating us every so often, providing us with progress updates on what's going on with the project.
Okay, so going back, right now, they need us, or we need to amend the agreement to increase our contribution, or help me out on this. I just clarify it.
Yeah, let me interject here, Chairman Alvarez. So yeah, there's what they just brought up here at the end of last year is that they were looking for an extension of the agreement to the end of 23. That's, I think, 2 years. And they're also looking for the monies that BARC have going from 13.2 split three ways to $19 million split three ways. We currently have a budget of $4.4 million total for the project approved by the board. 1 million of that has been sent to them, I think, last year or the year before. In this year's budget, we had $2 million budgeted for this next phase, but they're asking really for $4 million in this fiscal year. That's what the ask is right now. And we're considering this, as well as I have, as you know, reached out and talked to the city of Los Angeles about, as part of this, bringing this consideration to my board for approval, is what about the agreement to guarantee secondary effluent supply to West Basin into the future beyond our current agreement. That's always, we've been discussing that, but now that they brought up this additional money, which is for a pilot project specifically designed to improve water quality, initially the agreement as it stands, water quality being supplied to West Basin. So budgetary wise, that's where we have 3.4 million left in the budget. 2 million was earmarked for this year. They're asking for now for 4 because they've gone out and bought all this equipment, or they're purchasing this equipment. It's costing a lot more than they thought. Okay, I'll stop right there. Does that explain the budgetary part?
That explains it. So we're budgeted for 4.4 million total.
Total.
And we've given $1 million. We're budgeted for 2 million this year, and then we would budget the other 2 million. But unless we come back and increase the budget, we're going to be short 6 million. I'm sorry, 2 million, because they need a total of 6 from us now versus the 4.
Correct. You picked up everything. That's it.
Well, let me interject for 1 second. Because I think as the fund goes down to a certain level, then they obviously like the partners to replenish it. I see. So obviously this year they're buying everything. There's going to be a very big expenditure this year. But they were okay with us even just putting in the 2 million this year, even if they weren't changing the end, or what? What did I miss something there?
They are actually requesting us to give them 4 million, more than what we had budgeted for this year. We had budgeted 2 million for this year. They're asking us to send them $4 million.
Okay, so even if they hadn't changed, if the full project price had not changed, we had expected to, do a partial this year and a partial next year, not pay kind of as they go when they're buying all the equipment. There's going to be a big jump and then it's going to come back down. Okay, so I don't even know how, and I'm not blaming you guys. I don't even know how we missed that whole, situation.
I'm sorry, Director. You explain what situation we missed. I don't understand.
The situation that obviously this year would be a lot of capital expenditures by LA San. that means their fund's going to go in, to the bottom, and they're going to need more than the 2 million from us and whomever to replenish just to keep them afloat.
Well, okay, if I could respond to that, the budget we had, Director Houston, was $4.4 million. That's it. That's what's approved right now, not 19.
No, Pat, I understand that. What I'm talking about is you guys just said we were only going to put, I think, was it 2 million in this year or whatever it was? How much was it this year?
2
We're
million.
talking about fiscal year 2021. We have 2 million based on the information we had back in February this time last year.
Sure.
There was no talk about expanding the budget. So there was enough money until recently. They found out that the cost for the actual purchasing is a lot more than they thought. Now they're asking for a lot more. So 2 million seemed to be plenty at that point when we put it in the budget.
Okay, first of all, again, I understand all of that. It's not that I don't understand that, Pat. What I'm saying is obviously they got things moving. They ordered a lot of the equipment now. The capital is being expended now. The fund goes down to, under 30% or whatever it is, and people are supposed to put more money in. So in our initial analysis and going in this agreement, we already were only anticipating putting in a certain amount this year anyways, which seems like it would have already been unfunded. The project would have been underfunded between all three parties had we all just given that smaller amount, $2 million or whatever it was going to be.
Yeah, I'm not
Director
sure.
Houston, if I could, it is over budget. That's basically what LA Stats come back and said, look, 3 years ago, this project was going to cost $8 million. Now, for whatever reasons, we're at $17 million, and we've spent some of the money, so we're making a call, and people have to pony up. So that's kind of where we're at. And it's not our staff's fault. And this goes back to my question of who's managing the project, and it's LA Sands management of the project.
Oh yeah, Mr. Chair, no, I wholly understand. I mean, I guess the original project cost was 13.2 million, right?
Yes, 13.2 with contingency.
Correct. So even under 13.2, if we gave $1 million here and 2 million there, and then the last final bit, it just the timeline. It sounds to me like the timeline along the way that was put together didn't really make sense to cover the costs as they went. I guess everybody understood that, we were funding at a certain level, and that was apparently okay a year or two ago when this was signed. I'm just trying to understand, is my thought process accurate on that?
Well, again, from a few years, I don't think, first of all, staff missed anything like you characterized it, but we entered into an agreement signed by Shivaji and others back in 2018 for what they were given as the cost of the project, which was $11 million plus 20% contingency. And in the agreement, which is attached here, it was prescribed how you would pay out. So they're going through, if you can picture this, Director Houston, they're looking at vendors, they're going to Europe to look at things, whatever they were doing. And eventually they landed on 3 vendors. And the only initial request for money was the $1 million from all parties. And that's what we did. And we're waiting for the next round.
So let me step back one more time, because I'm not arguing with you, Pat. I'm not blaming you or your staff. As a matter of fact, it brings me up to a question I was going to ask. Was earlier you said that this was signed before you were here, which is true, and you said something along the lines of, I don't know why this was set up the way it was set up. So maybe you can explain that to me. What did the staff, the previous management, not do accurately that the board approved, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not going to go into all of that, but certainly with the benefit of hindsight, I just don't think we have enough say in this agreement. It's heavily driven by the city of LA Sand. They hired the contractors, Carollo and Stantec, pretty much unilaterally and just forwarded the bill. So there's certain things that if I were doing it, if it was my money, but like I said, that's with the benefit of hindsight. I'm not casting any aspersions on them, but since we're in it and it's gone behind schedule considerably and now way over budget, probably we do a few things differently for sure.
Sure. Okay. So let's just be clear. I understand everyone at the end of the day is blaming the former management regime, and that's
Not
probably
at all,
very accurate.
not for me.
No, that's probably very accurate, whatever it is. But guess what? That former management regime brought this to the board, so the board based its voting decisions on what it was told. So, you know, I just see, unfortunately, literally like blame going on to different parties who are no longer here. And there were 2 directors from this board that were at least participating in some of those conversations. So they were at least theoretically aware of some of this. I was not one of those board members, but you know, there was a lot of folks involved. So at the end of the day, here we are. Maybe it was a bad agreement that other people can take the blame for who aren't here anymore. But the board only, you know, was presented with information, and that's what they voted on, which that's obviously, look at all the different things that were coming before us now. We're seeing all these things that were probably not the best in the past. So I will just say 2 other things. You know, look, one is we're dependent on that water. Obviously, we're dependent on the quality of the water. So, you know, that goes without saying. And also, we're part of that 100%, you know, the water being recycled that's in this bigger plan of Los Angeles, is whether they are, you know, saying it or not to us. I don't see them taking our water away per se, but it seems like I don't see why we need to back out of this. I mean, I see that there's something in here. It says, yeah, we could back out of this agreement and just pay the cost and walk away. But it seems like it's 2 different conversations, this pilot project and then the long-term amount of water we have access to.
You want to address that, Pat?
Yeah, well, I'll address a couple of things. First of all, there's no blame game coming on from my staff or me. That's not what we're talking about. But I did take exception to saying, what did we miss? I don't think we missed anything, Director Houston. But moving on, I think it's a complicated project. Operation Next has come into the picture from when this agreement was originally signed. There's a new landscape here. There is an excess, you're correct, between the quality of the water and the quantity of the water, the very fact that we can get the water to begin with. So we need to ensure, as we invest in better water quality, that we know that we're with some certainty that we're going to get that water quality well into the future. And this water, if it were to go according to the current schedule, which just has the pilot ending here in a year or 2, would become available in 2035, correct, Markev? That would be the new water, 14, 15 years, if the whole project came to fruition. So that's the kind of, and I'm definitely not suggesting, or didn't hear anybody suggest we back out of it, but we're putting it on the table. What we're challenged with, we have to, we are being asked for more funds. We would like that to be tied, of course, to a guarantee of water supply, at least till 2035. Those conversations have been going on with LADWP as we speak, and with the folks at, and as far as the MBR pilot, with the next steps on that. They're awaiting our answer, and they're going to get back to us, because I put that request in front of them, as you know, that we would like to have some certainty of a supply of water as we pay into a project that will help improve the quality of that water, if that makes sense. So that's what I'd have to say on that. So today it's information, but we'll need to make a decision at some point. I would offer that we do have $3.4 million in the current budget, right? $2 million in the total project budget. So we're not like we're running out of money. We have money, but we just have less money in this year's budget, $2 million, than what they now are asking for, which is $4 million. So I know that's a lot to comprehend for everybody, but that's kind of where we're at. But we have a very broad, complicated, and very important collaborative relationship with the city of Los Angeles. Intersects on a number of fronts. The MBR pilot is one, the sale of recycled water is another, the purchase of secondary effluent is another, or major players down at the Metropolitan. So, and by and large, our relationship is very good. So we just need to work through this and now that you have all the current information, current requests, and current budget and schedule from the city, I'll come back to the board with an action item to give this an up or down vote on doing it, or and to have it tied to getting our secondary effluent purchase agreement extended. That would be the ideal thing for the West Basin family.
Okay, so timing wise, just kind of go over that again. They want the money now. I think that's pretty much on the table.
Correct.
But timing wise, how much time do we have? You started some additional negotiations. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit better for Director Houston's and mine edification here on that.
Okay, so I will do that, Chairman Alvarez. So in December, they brought what I think it's what starts there on 175. They brought that presentation or proposal and went into the details of what they were asking for. And to address your question of schedule, they said that we'd like to have this money contributed, $4 million in this fiscal year by June 30th of 2021. So, and of course, when we looked at that, of course, everybody said, all three parties, of course, are the $4.4 million that we each had budgeted up to this point obviously doesn't cover that. We spent 1.1 million, 3.4 doesn't cover 4 million. So, but we're not down to zero. We do have three, so we have some, in my opinion, some negotiating leverage there. Maybe we don't give the 4 million at this point. We give some portion of it until we figure out some of these other issues, like the agreement to purchase the secondary effluent. We are currently in an agreement to purchase secondary effluent from the city that expires in June 2021, this year. And it's automatically renewed as per the original contract. And the letter which I've sent to the board and we've discussed with the board is it is renewed for 5 years through July 2026 with a view to, it states in there, a view to renegotiating a longer term contract 2026 and beyond with the new water quality. And it mentions specifically that we'll know more about what that might look like from the MBR pilot study. Now, the MBR pilot study schedule has slipped quite a bit, as is evidenced in our discussion today, but that would not give us all of the answers. So the schedule that I see, we will need to make a decision on how much money we can pay them this year, or if we want to just go ahead and extend the term of the agreement and increase the budget, we could do that. But I strongly recommend that we tie that to an assurance of some shape or form, which I put in front of, that's what I'm asking for. And they said, DWP said they're looking at it to give us an agreement at least through 2035 for the water quality that we're seeing today. Because their MBR water, again, won't be available till 2035 schedule. So complicated, but that's hopefully, Chairman Alvarez, that helps explain it.
Okay, so timing wise, we have a little bit of time, but not a lot. You got, they're really expecting the money in the next 6 months. They're not expecting it tomorrow.
I think they might be expecting it sooner, but I've told them this is a decision way above my. I said I have to bring it back. It's going to take months to figure this out. We got some time. You're right.
So I think we definitely need to be in a position where just being good partners, we're going to be committed to this agreement. I think we ought to be a little bit more actively involved in the management of it, given the fact that the cost overruns and time delays may just be the tip of the iceberg. And not just for the pilot plant, but for the entire project. So that they're telling us that we're going to have water by 2035. You could put a big question mark on that one too. And we need to make other decisions because we need to move forward with really having our recycled water system operating in a very much more efficient basis and a much more cost-effective basis, and expand the use of recycled water in the West Basin. So your discussions right now, subsequent to December, when all, or sometime at the end of last year, when all of this kind of came to light, have been expanded, where you are now dealing on multiple agreements, not just this agreement.
Correct. I've introduced that there's a direct nexus. It's a simple thing. You increase your a budget for a project that's expressly designed to give you better water quality, but that water quality and water would show up in 2035 beyond your existing agreement. 2026, you want to have some kind of like I said, nexus and guarantee in there. It seems like a no-brainer, but they're looking at it, and I think that will go favorably. But we'll certainly up the tempo of those negotiations.
Okay.
But to your point about, I am very, very respectful of the relationship. Like I mentioned, we work with the city of LA, and we have for a long time. The relationship is very important. And you're right, what we do with our recycled water program is completely hinged or connected to getting that water from Hyperion and having an agreement, whatever the water quality is. The price of it would change if it was MBR quality, but whatever it is and whenever it gets here, the new water quality that is. So yeah, all that's on the table. And I hope the board or the committee agrees with that approach.
No, I think that you have to do it that way. I think it's very important that we have long-term agreements, as we are very dependent on our source water. That's your raw input into the entire process. So that source water is critical. All right, at this point, I'm not seeing that we need to make an immediate decision. I think that you need to continue these discussions, and maybe you need to keep us more abreast as to kind of where it's moving, and maybe this would be an item that we discuss every month.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely a monthly or more often as needed as we develop, because this is the underpinning for our entire recycled water program is securing that water from Hyperion.
The raw water source is critical.
Yep.
Okay, and we've got a lot of money invested in the system, and a lot of money that we will be investing as we look at moving into the future. Okay, so for purposes of right now, because I'm going to need to get going too, and we need to wrap this meeting up. I apologize, but I just realized that I'm already late for something. So,
okay. Well, thank you for the great input.
If we don't need to, I think we're fine with this right now. The direction is you can continue your discussions, moving on multiple points or fronts in terms of the agreements, and keep us informed, and we'll bring this back next month. And if you need if you need to talk about it sooner, we can always have a meeting. Okay,
understood.
All right. With that, if we can move on. I'm sorry, Director Houston, go ahead.
No, could I just say too, I agree with everything that's been said, but I really want us to have a very cooperative relationship with the city. Hopefully not antagonistic on either side. We need to make this work. It's been a long process, and there's been delays. I understand the cost overruns, and we can concern ourselves at another time as to why things happen the way they happen. But at the end of the day, we need our staff to work on negotiations, and I do agree we need to probably have this, whatever you need, Pat, is once a month or more, because we're already in February and they're asking for things by the end of this fiscal year. Plus, we've got our own budget that we're going to be in the process of now starting our process too, to figure out what are we allocating for next year. So obviously keeping all these things in mind, there's a lot of moving parts. So I just ask staff to, do your best with the city. So thank you.
Yeah, understood. That's definitely been our goal, and that's how we approach. This is my top priority, staff's top priority right now. It's probably the top priority for this agency, getting this sorted out. All right.
Okay, with that, I think we've pretty much covered that item for the time being.
Right.
There's no closed session.
No.
Any other director's comments?
Sure. Sure, Mr. Chair, and I'll be as fast as I can because I know that it's late and you got to go, but just a couple real quick things. I was not there, but I do understand the last meeting as committee, there was talk about the Kennethon Park that got pushed back to this meeting, but I don't see anything was agendized, so I just was wondering what exactly happened.
Yeah, I can address that. We had an item before the last committee meeting, an action item which didn't move forward with a recommendation from the committee. We said we would come back. The intention was to come back at this committee, but to answer some of the questions that were raised in terms of the funding and the customers. As I spoke to you about this separately, Director Houston reached out to David McNeil, who has asked me to come and present to his the Baldwin Hills Conservancy Agency about where this project is at. But I have told him, I said, I need to really go through this with my board first. So we're still collecting some information and looking into some of the questions raised by the then committee members. And would probably, I think we'll bring it back. Yeah, we'll bring it back next month.
Okay, if it's ready to come back, but we need to be ready, and a lot of those questions need to be answered so that we don't end up rehashing the same thing and having to take it back.
That's why we did that.
Okay.
Have all the answers.
Okay. Okay.
Director Deere, you want to say something? Director Deere, go ahead.
No, I have nothing. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'll wrap up here. Okay, thank you for that. And so Mr. McNeil, he knows though that this is on hold. Is that correct, Pat?
Well, on hold as far as me going to speak to the Baldwin Hills Conservancy as to the very current status. Correct.
Good. Okay. I think
this week, I forget it was Monday.
I think that for sure what needs to happen is this board needs to be in alignment as to what's going on and next steps. That way when you go to his board, can provide the best information. So whatever timetable was happening, just let's make sure that this board is clearly informed.
That's exactly why we postponed it. So that's the sequence we'll follow, Director Houston, or the West Basin Board direction first.
And I know that somebody mentioned that, because I heard about it, somebody mentioned I was in talks with Janice Hahn, Supervisor Hahn, about this project, which I'm not in talks with Supervisor Hahn about this project. She does not represent that area, by the way. So whoever said that was misinformed. Okay, next, really quick. I mentioned it earlier, but one of the things I've noticed, unfortunately, is during our meetings, especially virtual, we seem to be getting these, the presentations emailed to us at the last minute, so we don't have a chance to look at them. I mean, the one today was 15 minutes before the meeting, and so I'm trying to scroll through this and then listening and all that. So I really would ask staff, if at all possible, to prepare those things so they can be sent with the board packet so we can look at them. Because there's a lot of numbers today, and I would have loved to really gone through that ahead of time, but I couldn't. So please, if you guys can do that, I know it's not always possible, but I really do ask that. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and this is more complimentary and to the board, and obviously Director Williams is not here, but I think these were great discussions today, and I think these are the discussions that we need to have. There's no silver coating. What's the truth? And the truth is that there's a lot of projects that seem to have been going in the wrong direction. So I'm glad that the board is being informed properly and making some key decisions. I know we got a lot more to do. So I just want to commend the board, the members that are still here, for that, as well as staff. And thank you, staff, because it was a great job. And I know a lot of you are still on the line. It's much appreciated. Bottom line is, this board, we've got to look at the future of our budget and our resources. And I think most of you are aware, there's a lot of constrictions that are current and coming down the pike at us. Yes. And so, we need to have good data and information and make decisions. And it may be what it is, but that's the way we have to go forward. So I'm very open-minded as to the next steps the direction of the agency. So thank you, and thank you, Chair Alvarez. Thank you so much for a good meeting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't have any other comments, so with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
The next scheduled meeting is March. I do one last thing. I said I don't have any other comments, but the Engineering and Operations Committee will be meeting on the second Wednesday of the month, not the second Thursday of the month, beginning in March, and the meeting will be at 4 p.m., not at 1:30 p.m.
Oh, okay. So what time again?
4 p.m.
Okay. Okay, because I got an email the other day, and I'm an alternate, but the staff said to me 1:30. So when they resend it, Desi, I'll definitely fix my calendar, but if staff could make sure I have the right information, that'd be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
We'll update that. And thank you for the kind words, Director Houston and Director Alvarez. Thank you, staff.
Okay.